Well, that was fun. You guys want to do a season 9 ranking?
Eh, sure.
So, new season, new episodes, but the same rules. Last season's theme was highly requested matchups, or legacy episodes if you will. This, however, is introducing new franchises to the Death Battle series.
Technically, this isn't an official theme, but at the same time, it is, so shut up. In Season 8+1, we have already been introduced to Akira, literal mythology, and
SpongeBob SquarePants!
Needless to say, there was a lot of weird more. We need more. Like, a lot more. An entire...
Okay, yeah, point is, we're doing another ranking. Ultimately, this season, at least in my opinion, is probably a big step up for the series as a whole. A lot of the episodes here were really high quality. Even if some people disagreed with them here or there, but we're not talking about that here. We're just talking about the quality of what was shown. We're all going to do our own individual rankings and then average that out to show you the list we have here today.
Let's just get this over with.
It's time for a season ranking!
So when we asked you guys what you thought last place was going to be, there was one very common answer. And yeah, you were right. Last place is...
Guys. You hear? Good. Some kid is going to fight Satan.
Oh, really?
Neat.
Yeah, this one certainly was a surprise. People were expecting Deku to fight Gon and Asa fight Meliodas before either one fought each other, but admittedly, pretty much as soon as this got revealed, I saw opinions shifting quite a bit.
Generally, there was a good few who started to really dig this as an idea, and some who are already huge fans of it and were happy to see, and a large majority who were very much against it. Me personally, I was in the latter because I just didn't see it working at all. Like, it just felt so random to me, and Asta's main gimmick not even working against Deku just kind of seemed like an obvious issue that they just ignore, but whatever. This was just continuing the trend of me not really caring for much of the reveals this season, and I wasn't really expecting much from it.
Personally, I was very neutral towards the matchup, because the only character of the four I mentioned that I know is Deku, so it didn't really matter all that much to me.
For me personally, I just thought this matchup was just a surprising one, mainly because of when they did Deku. I didn't really have any preferred for Deku. In fact, I was mostly neutral on his options, so anything could have worked for me. But I will admit that having Asta's main gimmick not be in use is definitely detriment to the matchup. But it's definitely something that's not totally killing the matchup for me though.
But hey, at least the episode turned out alright, right? The episode turned out alright, right?
Deku's analysis is actually pretty good. Goes over his story pretty well, editing is superb as always, and I like the flow of it. Not a standout for the season, but it's pretty solid overall.
Honestly, I was impressed with how much they included for Deku's side of things. I wasn't expecting them to include the most recent chapters, all of the newest abilities. Even if they didn't have a part in the animation, per se, them being considered at all, I wasn't expecting. Like Gear Shift.
And Asta's analysis was...
Asta's analysis is really mediocre. Compared to how Deku's was able to balance story and abilities and segue them pretty well into each other, Asta's is really abrupt. Just going into, This is the Black Bulls. This is what they do. Now here's what Asta does, with no cohesion whatsoever, while they were able to do just fine for Deku. And while they were also able to weave Deku's relationship with Bakugo really well into the rundown, Yunos is just kind of plopped right at the end, again with no real segue. It just feels so jarring. Not as jarring, however, as the running gag that just kind of kills any enjoyment for me. I'm not going to try to go too deep into it because it's not that deep, but it adds to a way bigger issue, which I'll get to later down the line in this segment. All you need to know is that Asta's rundown just does not feel all that well structured or executed, especially in comparison to Deku's, which kind of encapsulates how I feel about this episode as a whole. By the way, they just kind of flat out called Asta irritating. That's always fun to see. It's also fun to see them compare it to One Piece, because I haven't seen enough of that as a fairy tale fan. The voices don't stop.
And also, the analysis, it kind of goes back to what I said about Deku's, how I praised how they included everything, even the most recent stuff that you wouldn't have expected to see. Yeah, they didn't do that for Asta. They ignored his most powerful form and one of his most recent abilities that he got around the same time Gear Shift happened.
They also kind of nonchalantly brought up Lebe, who is Asta's demon half-brother, which I'm pretty sure Black Clover fans know, but if you didn't know, you probably forgot they brought it up to begin with, which is pretty odd considering that this is like one of the most important relationships Asta has. Even more odd that he shows up in the beginning of the fight and he just floats there. And you don't see him for the rest of the fight until that one green screen effect near the end. Oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. We gotta talk about the rest of the fight first, don't we? Kill me!
We start off in the Colosseum. There we see
Aquaman? What are you doing there?
on the left we see All Might's pupil Deku, and on the right we see Asta La Vista, or whatever his name is.
Except we don't. This fight doesn't have Asta. We got someone who looks like Asta, we got someone who has Asta's weapons, but this just isn't Asta.
Kind of something that happens throughout this fight, unfortunately. They don't really characterize him how you would expect him. And also, on a smaller note, now we can bring up the voice actors.
Deku, who sounds more like Morty. Ah, jeez, All Might, I don't want to do this.
You gotta get in there, Morty. You gotta kick his ass.
And then we have our boy Asta.
Who doesn't sound like Asta? Have you noticed the theme yet? Basically anything revolving around Asta just isn't. The way he fights, he just kind of took a move from Zoro, which he's never done before. Or the way he talks, all of his stuff is just, haha, I'm strong and stupid, which at best simplifies his character and at worst completely gets him wrong.
From what I understand, both of them are supposed to be very strategic but powerful fighters, but this episode would not give you that information.
As someone who is relatively blind to all of Black Clover and Asta, he just came off as this sort of angry jock with no brains and all broads. He didn't really seem that charming or really someone I would ever get into at all, really. And it just kind of made me like him less overall.
And that's definitely not helped by the fact that they repeated the same locker joke multiple times throughout this episode. But back on topic of the fight, the sprites are okay. Asta's is much higher quality than Deku's in my opinion, but both look pretty good. I do have a nitpick on Deku's, the fact that the design they used is like from a very specific context where his suit was already torn and tattered. It makes it feel like, yeah, he just walked in this fight after getting beat up by the dude outside.
Why does he look so pink? Why is his cheek so pink? God, he's so pink.
There's also some shots where he just kind of straight up looks like a stick figure, but again, that doesn't really mean much in the comparison to Asta. But any problem that Deku has, Asta has way worse. Take a moment with the Black Whips, for example, where Asta just kind of lets himself get punched repeatedly, even after getting the sword that can specifically cut himself out of the situation. He just kind of takes it. Is he a masochist?
Which then leads into the funniest line in this fight, in my opinion.
I don't know what Detroit is, but I've had enough.
I suggest you use your right to remain silent before I show your robot ass to
And the scene that preceded it is just frankly strange. Deku spends a lot of time just trying to get the book off Asta, and it ultimately accomplishes nothing. So this animation just has a big, huge waste of time of him just swinging him back and forth, hitting him back and forth over and over and over again, and it just feels pointless and not that exciting. Like, even with the music in the background that sounds grand and epic, just feels incredibly misplaced and really odd.
And that's the main thing here. Deku seems to get all this chance to strategize. Asta doesn't really get to do any of that, but even on Deku's side, none of his strategy actually does anything.
Which personifies my entire issue with this episode. It is Deku the episode, but it doesn't get to be Deku the episode, because Deku doesn't get to accomplish much of anything, but at least he gets representation. The arena, it's all My Hero Academia, that one building structure they did during that time they were trying to get their hero license. The music, it's Strongest Alive. It sounds good on its own, but it has absolutely no Black Clover representation, be in the music itself or even the lyrics. Most of the spotlight goes to Deku, talking about his strategies, his moment winding up for the climax, and actually getting to scream, unlike Asta, which is the one thing they talked about in the rundown, how he never shuts up, but he hardly screams in this one. And speaking of that climax, I just want to say right now, throughout the animation, the effects feel off. In other Sprite episodes, the effects look amazing, but here it just kind of comes off as distracting at times. The color clash doesn't look all that good. Asta was supposed to collide against a piece of debris, but the effects make it look like he just stops right next to it. And despite everything on screen, it doesn't try to mask just how jank some of the shots are. Like I said, where Deku could look like a stick figure sometimes, he's a stick figure that can't seem to bend the lower half of his body at all, even when he's falling straight down.
And this shot in particular, in the storyboard, looked pretty cool. Like, you can feel the motion, but in the actual animation, he's doing a goofy Saitama-looking run.
Speaking of Goofy, in the beginning of the fight, Asta says he's going to hit him really hard. A+ strategy. But once we get to the climax, Deku tries to call it back, and they try to make it so epic and grand, but no, it's just stupid.
Especially because the entire point was to try and make it feel like Deku was the strategist of the two. But then he gives up on strategy, I guess?
He gives up on life too, because apparently he punches so hard that he dies. But not before the two of them go down, cause a giant explosion to kill the entire arena, and then they're up again, inexplicably. This isn't the first time they just teleport from place to place for some reason, but this is definitely the most notable.
I will mention on that front that, once again, the storyboard feels like it had a more clear motion in mind. It seems like Deku might have been intended to win the clash, but die in the process, which doesn't really feel like something Deku would do. He has never exerted enough energy to outright kill himself. But yeah, it feels like Asta was intended to go down, Deku was intended to stay where he was.
Wanna know what did say? The swords, which just kind of makes me ask, what was Asta's plan in that final clash other than to fly at him really hard?
And then in a completely out of nowhere and cheap shot move, Asta decides, you know what, despite him already being dead, I'm going to slice him to pieces even though he's already down and then make him die and fall in a Family Guy pose.
Not only did Asta know full well that Deku was dead because of his ki sensing, but the way he went about this is the most out-of-character way someone should win a fight, and probably ever. One of the main things about Asta, even if it's not apparent right out the bat, is that he respects his opponent, unless it's a literal devil. But I guess Detroit is worse than Satan himself. Good job. But hey, at least Hercule's there at the World Martial Arts Tournament. Wait, martial art? Then why is Asta here? He's a sword fighter.
But on the note of Hercule, I will mention the entire ending felt really undercut by humor where it didn't feel like it fit the matchup. It felt so out of place to have 3 jokes, one after the other.
Not to mention, all preceding the fact that Deku literally killed himself just to try and win in vain. Oh yeah, the post-analysis. I feel like it's common knowledge by now that the main feat that they had Deku lose to is wrong. I even pulled up pictures from the manga to prove it.
Yeah, it wasn't actually a blast, per se. It wasn't a huge mass of energy. It was some swords.
Do-do-do-do-do-do.
So yeah, the actual calculation of the feat realistically doesn't make much sense. Although this level of power in Black Clover still isn't weird. This is an early series feat. They have stuff just as, if not more impressive later on, which does just make it weirder that they chose to use this.
Especially when there's a feat of equal power right there in the tab that people just do not read. It also doesn't really help in much that they say that, oh, Deku's fast, but Asta can do that. in his sleep. So in the end, you have an episode that's centered around one of the combatants rather blatantly, but then he dies a humiliating death, and the post-analysis says that even in his sleep, Asta was still comparable, if not faster. So who is this episode for? Asta's representation is probably one of the worst in all of Modern Death Battle, and Deku doesn't really get a time to shine. So if this episode's goal was to finally put the who can Deku fight issue to bed, all it did was intensify it.
Also, yeah, he didn't ever use the giant sword for some reason.
Now, I do want to stress, despite all the issues and the problems with the episode, and me agreeing with a good amount of them, I do want to say that this episode's problems isn't necessarily the fault of the matchup itself, but more of what ultimately came of it.
This episode definitely had potential to work. It just didn't capitalize on it.
If anything, it just kind of proved my doubts and solidified itself into the bottom 10 episodes of all time for me. And this isn't something that I'm proud of. This isn't something that I like to gloat. This is genuinely devastating because of the attachment that I have to these characters.
Well, I don't agree with that personally. Me getting a bad impression from a character I don't know about, only to learn that they're not really like that at all, just kind of a shame, really, especially from what I've seen. The character seems alright. So for me personally, this is one of the 2 episodes this season I really did not like at all.
I have seen so many people hate Asta because of this episode, and it's crushing because this isn't what he's like. But hopefully one day we'll get an episode that pushes beyond its limits, and Deku will get a run back where he can finally go plus Ultra. That was stupid.
That was really stupid. Anyway, on to the next one.
The year was 1987.
Hey look, it's the episode that everyone expected to be last, but it wasn't last because...
In reality, this one, I understand why people put it last. In a lot of ways, it's kind of boring.
It's a boring matchup. Should have been Arbiter, guys.
I think it's okay.
But ultimately, yeah, this one is okay. Ultimately, the matchup isn't that interesting, but unlike the last one, this one doesn't have quite as many weird character things. I said quite as many.
Unfortunately for Predator, complete lack of character falls under that, but we're gonna get there when we get there.
So, let's talk about Boba Fett's analysis. It's been a while since we last saw him. His last outing was back in 2015 with Samus vs. Boba Fett 2, and he has quite an updated arsenal since then. We got to see more of his weapons, more of his actual origin.
It's nice to see a fresh, original take on Boba Fett's analysis, on his skills and abilities, even his stats to an extent.
Which, yeah, he has stats now, which he didn't get in the last 2 episodes, for obvious reasons, of course. But this is what I also like about Boba Fett's analysis. It doesn't feel like they're just retooling him and bringing him over to a new setting and just living in out of that. It makes it feel like he's a new character.
Unlike some characters.
I'm Batman.
Unfortunately, despite all these innovations, it's still pretty boring. I didn't really find myself connected to this rundown, invested in Boba Fett or his journey. For me, I'm just not much of a Star Wars guy, but I hear that's just how it is, even for Star Wars fans.
It's kind of funny how Star Wars fans are getting sick of Boba Fett. Then why did you ask for it?
No, it's so funny. I never understood Fett's stats to begin with. As Deadpool said, 5 whole lines in the trilogy, and one of them was,
And then we have Predator's analysis, which peaks at the beginning because they mentioned 1987. Even the audience agrees because that's the most viewed clip in the entire episode.
Everything else about the analysis, though, it's kind of structured horrifically.
Now, it is worth mentioning, since there isn't really a normal or standard Predator, they're basically taking feats and history from all the Predators and combining it into one, which in retrospect either works for you or it doesn't.
And if it works for you, then you probably haven't been too deep in Predator lore. Nemesis explained this pretty well, but the Predators aren't just this hive mind kind of thing. They're separate tribes which have their separate weapons, their separate rules, their codes of honor, and how Death Battle went about that was basically giving Predator everything, which does not work with Predator lore in the slightest. Whoops.
in lieu of them trying to make just this homogenized Predator, it made it feel really boring. It made it feel like it was just a generic movie monster, which doesn't really aid to make an interesting death battle.
It is so funny to me. They want to structure this analysis like this Predator is the best of the best. And then we got John Yaucha. Oh boy, there's a lot to dig into. So forks out, everyone. We're about to eat this.
The fight starts and we see it takes place in the jungle of Vietnam. Or I assume it's Vietnam. There's a bunch of hanging corpses there, so who knows. Wait, what is he doing there anyways?
Finally, I've made it. Untitled Jungle. So while Boba Fett's taking his lovely time looking at dead bodies for whatever reason, the Redditor spots his prey, and he gets in the lunge, only to get shot immediately. And if you're upset with how pathetic this guy looks, stop watching. It doesn't get better.
For what's supposed to be this homogenized Predator, like the best of his kind, he kind of sucks.
There are plenty of moments where it looks like he has an opening, and then he just kind of stops. Wait, where'd he go? Where'd he go? Where'd he go? That's a bomb.
Generally, the fight sequences, the animation, is fine, although a little bit slow. It felt like the laser beams were moving much slower than they had any right to. That's my biggest problem in that regard, at least.
Not as slow as Boba Fett's ability to process information. Even though he's wearing the 360 vision helmet, he doesn't see that giant fucking blade that cuts off his arm. Like, he uses it in the beginning of the fight, and then he just doesn't at this point, which is the biggest time the Predator gets an advantage. But just like Sagat versus Dan, it feels like it comes out of pity, rather than the other guy genuinely earning it. That's a Street Fighter reference.
Now let's talk about what even led to him getting his arm chopped off. You see, Predator plays a voice clip, and for some reason, Boba Fett was so enraptured by this that he just stands there like an idiot. And yeah, both of these combatants are exceptional hunters.
You wouldn't get that impression if you saw this.
Boba Fett using the staff just reeks of an old man with a cane.
And that's kind of the main thing with this episode, because while there is a moment of them using legitimate strategy of tricking the other or outsmarting the other, there's also an equal amount of really stupid moments, like the Predator just stabbing a tree, even though he has infrared and he can see through the tree and that Boba Fett isn't there.
Actually, real-life infrared cannot see through walls or trees in this instance.
Oh, but then there's a really cool moment of Boba Fett cauterizing his own arm, which is really raw. But then there's a moment later on where the Predator just kind of stops mid-swing, even though he's looking directly at him, and the lightsaber emanates a heat that's hotter than the fire around them, but he still can't see?
Which is funny because he fought evenly when there was fire around him earlier, so what's the deal with that?
And going back to that lightsaber bit, everyone talks about how cool it is. Why didn't he do that as soon as his arm was cut off and not right in front of the person that's trying to kill him?
By the way, Boba Fett is voiced by Cameron Nicol. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
He does a really good job portraying Boba, making him sound really cool throughout the fight.
But he also voices a certain other character later in the season who punches the best. But as for the track, it's fine. It's nothing special. It's good background music for the fight, but not something I would normally listen to, and I think most people could agree with me on that one.
Back to the climax. The Redditor takes off his mask to reveal that he's a neckbeard, which is followed by a really forced reference, and then they have a couple final exchanges, which look better than the earlier shots. But that being said, the close quarter combat moments in these SFM fights are a real mixed bag, and this is in the latter half of that mixed bag, unfortunately. Then you get the final hit, which doesn't seem to phase the Redditor at all.
She's too much! I have no choice.
He activates the self-destruct sequence, repeats another line from Boba Fett, and then...
Well, that was anticlimactic.
And incredibly contradictory to the research, as the post-analysis explains and confuses.
Now, the post-analysis is one of the few I actually disagree with, at least to a certain extent. Not necessarily about the winner, but about how they went with things. For starters, they mentioned how the Jedis are much more formidable opponents than the Xenomorphs. Which, yeah, I do agree with. But at the same time, let's be frankly realistic here. Jedis, at any given time, could easily defeat a normal Mandalorian. Heck, you even mentioned that they restrict themselves in Obi-Wan vs. Kakashi. So, yeah, I don't get that point. It's minor, but, you know. Another problem I have with the post-analysis is how they talk about Predator's suicide move, and how it would have easily killed Boba Fett if he was at the epicenter. Which is funny because in the fight, he was right in the freaking middle of it. What the hell?
Something else about the explosion that I don't bring up is that it's never really meant to be used offensively. It's something that the Predator does to get rid of any presence he's ever had. It's never really something that they do to take down someone else with them, so I don't know why they decided to make this such a big versus thing when it was never meant to be one.
And that was Boba Fett vs. Predator. What did we think? It was fine. I don't know. I didn't really care about it much. It was okay to me.
It was definitely an episode. Both could have gone out way worse, but yeah, this is a nice way for him to say goodbye to the show, at least for now.
Poor John Yacha, though. Hopefully he gets another shot.
Hey guys, something came in the mail today. Look at that.
Is that?
Yes, it is. At least they got my good side. It's kind of hard to get my bad side, since I'm a ball and stuff.
Hey guys, nice costumes.
Is that your costume?
Yeah, why wouldn't it be?
Can you, switch back? You're making me a little bit uncomfortable like that.
Huh? Okay, sure.
How would Ochlik feel knowing that you're impersonating him?
Yeah.
Huh. That was weird.
Man, this should have been 13th place.
The Halloween episode this season, the 13th episode this season, that also released around the time Halloween Ends was coming out. And this also came out 13 years after Jason's last theatrical appearance. Fun fact, SpongeBob vs. Aquaman was originally going to be the Halloween episode.
And that's what's really scary.
With all those things lining up, you think this episode would have been everything that everyone would have wanted. Well, no.
Not exactly.
This was one of our most wanted matchups this season, and me personally, this was the match I was easily the most excited for all season, because most of them I really wasn't into it, or just didn't really care to it all that much.
Now, I have some history with this match. Let me just walk you through my experience with this matchup when it was first announced. So me, like many others, expected this episode to be live action, but then it was announced that it was going to be 3D. Obviously, that's a bit disappointing, but I was willing to work with it. They could make stuff look great in 3D. They've done that before, right? And then we found out the track name. Thank God it's Halloween. Interesting choice of name.
Probably one of the weirder ones they could have picked.
Oh yeah, the track. Gonna get it out of the way right now. In terms of how it's used in the fight, works perfectly fine. Has a lot of atmosphere, includes both of their themes. It's good. But on its own, it sounds really weird. But this is one that's very context heavy for the fight itself, so that's excusable. Not much more to it than that.
But still, I wasn't going to let that detract from my overall enjoyment of the matchup. And then the episode came out.
Credit where it's due, the presentation is on point, with the entire main cast circling around a campfire, trying to tell each other scary stories to lighten the mood. But of course, just like everything, they gotta drag work into it and ruin all the fun. This is why you can't have a barbecue with these guys. They gotta drag calcs into it somewhere. Or crippling addiction to alcohol, one of the two.
I do agree with that. I really like the overall presentation of it, and specifically, I just love the editing shots for all the comic panels for both, especially on Michael's end. It really just gets across that eerie feel that both can have, but also just that sinister, unstoppable nature that both can just possess in their movies, and I really dug that.
Wiz also talks in a sinister tone throughout the analysis. It's more subtle than you might realize, but it really just sells the whole campfire aspect of it. And that's something that's pretty good. It makes the atmosphere just all the more authentic.
And let's not forget all of the Death Battle crew just getting picked off one by one as they die, presumably.
To be fair, we never see Dummy for the rest of the season, which is, normal for him, but still.
Heck, I even like the music choice and even the clips they showed for both. But at the same time, it also feels really lacking For one, the stats given to both, they don't really have that many in the episode. They're just put at vaguely around the same tier, and I don't know, I'm not a fan of that. We don't really get to see them highlight how ferocious and how much of Jason's brute strength is shown off, and they don't highlight, well, not really on the same level, Michael's own tankier feats, or really compare how his intelligence is actually better than Jason's. They just say he's smart, but we don't really get any sort of comparison between that. And yeah, while I do like the story presented, I would have liked an equal balance around the stats, because when it's an equal balance of both, I really do dig that. But here, it just kind of leans towards more one side, and I don't know, it just feels a little disappointing in that aspect.
For me, however, I think the biggest missed opportunity was not going into the more wackier side of these characters, with how supernatural they can sometimes be in the movies. They don't really touch a lot upon that. Yeah, they mentioned that Jason has fought some supernatural enemies, like Freddy Krueger, for example, but not much else. They don't really go into much of his more sanier and crazier abilities. Not even for the post-analysis, where they could have mentioned ways that Jason could have won without directly killing him. Like possessing, for example, by having him eat his art. Yeah, they just kind of glossed over all of that stuff in the analysis, just to like a brief offhand mention. I don't know, that was something I was really looking forward to for the analysis of these two. It's not a deal breaker, but it just kind of leaves a lot to be desired. And for Michael, it could have gone into his thorn curse, like how he fucked his
Personally, I would disagree, although I do understand where it comes from. I'm someone who was always more interested in the grounded, or at least relatively grounded, aspect of the characters, so it's definitely what I wanted the fight to lean more into. Although, the teleportation argument between Boomstick and Wiz was pretty funny, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I definitely gotta agree there. That was probably one of the best highlights of the episode.
It proves that they watch Game Theory.
Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, the show where I spend too much time measuring Luigi's dong. Today we're going to find out just how powerful Michael Myers truly is. Turns out, not at all, as we're about to see in this animation where he hardly shows up. Let's get into it.
Okay, yes, let's just get it out of the way. The runtime. It is abysmally short, criminally so. Barely any fighting actually happens in the episode, and the amount of screen time both clock in at around a minute-ish, with Michael being slightly under, which is really sad. It's like watching Halloween Ends.
Michael has less screen time here than Jason is in Manhattan in Part 8.
So, this episode, I can give it credit, I like the atmosphere it's going for. Although it definitely would have lended itself more to a live-action style. They were going for an actual horror movie feel, but with a runtime of about 3 minutes in the entire fight, they don't really have the time to build up protagonists and have the horror monsters show up and do their thing. So, both are pretty lacking, admittedly.
On the topic of victims, let's draw our attention to this guy, because the episode did, and now we're going to make it your problem once again. Say hello to Joe Victim. Do you see it on his name tag? No? That's because it's under his coat, but you can't take off his coat because that's part of his model. Oh, and it's durable too. Durable enough to take a chop with an axe, and nothing happens. He just kind of keeps going. And going. And going. And going. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, as you can tell by some of the fight scenes, it's kind of jank in some areas. Or a lot of areas, to be specific.
There are a lot of weird moments in this fight. Like, there's a moment where Michael just pins Jason to the tree, where he's grabbing him, he just suddenly turns his body into the completely different direction, to the point where he's facing him on the tree. And then there's the part where Michael just knocks Jason down and then stomps on him, and Jason just shakes aggressively. And the same thing happens to Michael too, where his model just shakes aggressively after being hit once, and it looks like his model is just seconds away from just breaking down. And then during the killing blow, when Jason hits Michael over the head with the axe just randomly clones himself for some reason. And also, as he's hitting him with the axe, the knife that was stabbed onto his head just completely disappears with his entire shot, just because. And generally, the way they move for the most part is just really unfitting for both. Like, it's just unreasonably fast when both of them are much more zombie-like guerrilla type fighters. It's actually more accurate in the storyboards, where Michael moves more like he does in the movies than here in this actual animation. Same for Jason too, and it's just really strange to me. I don't understand why it was portrayed as though they were just like people with knives.
And that's sad as well, because they make a note that they can literally use anything as a weapon, yet just stuck with their basic arsenal. Which, yeah, that's fair enough, but like, well, I'd love to see some more weapon usage of these two. Maybe they could go into a shack, and there they could find different tools they could use against each other. That would have been a fun little segment.
And that's the key word here. More. I wish there was more. I wish there was more than just 40 seconds of fighting, which clocks in as one of the shortest fights in all of DB history, which, yes, includes Season 1 fights, and I wish there was more potential use in the fight. I wish we could have actually seen Jason go unmasked. I wish we could have actually seen them go to a shack and set it on fire and have a duel in the fire, as both of them have iconic moments where they fight in the fire. I wish they could have utilized the fact that this was 3D. If it was live action, I understand it being more grounded would have made more sense, but it being 3D, I wish they actually utilized it being 3D.
Yeah, because nothing really here justifies it being 3D. You could have easily made this in live action and nothing would have changed.
Exactly, and it being 3D, I would have expected to see more from it. Maybe even see more of their goofier kills portrayed in the fight.
And see, that's where the fight honestly picks itself up for me a little bit. While there isn't a lot of variety in weapons, they do portray them using their environments to their advantage. They do reference the sleeping bag kill near the start, as difficult as it might be to see, with Jason trying to use the dead body of the girl as a weapon against Michael. You have Michael use the tombstone as a blunt object to get the upper hand on Jason near the end of the fight, and you then have him use the discarded axe as yet another tool to try and kill Jason.
And as much crap as me and Hyper has given the animation itself, the part with Pamela's head briefly replacing the Halloween pumpkin is still one of the best things about this animation. Pamela just talking down to Jason and telling him to kill Michael. Straight out of the movies.
Pamela's encouraging words bend reality itself, allowing Jason to get out of the kneeling position, out from under Michael's foot, and headbutt him before stabbing him through the torso.
Michael then retaliates by stabbing the fuck out of Jason's head. But that was enough to stop Jason, so he just grabs the axe, slices into Michael's head, takes the knife out of his own head, and then slices Michael's head clean off like it's straight out of H2O.
Honestly, one of the rawer kills of the season to me. He then grabs Michael's decapitated head with the axe still in it, chops it clean in half, and then proceeds to go find his pizza rolls.
Seeing you guys talk about it in such great detail makes me realize, man, there is just nothing to talk about here. As someone who's not really into horror scene, I really have no attachment to these characters, and ergo, I don't really see much out of the episode, which is to be expected. Not every Death Battle episode is going to be as accessible as possible, and given how horror themed it all is, if you're not into horror, then you're probably not going to be into this episode. Though, even though you are into horror, you're probably not going to get much out of this episode anyway. Whoops, did I say something?
And I wish it could end there, but then there's also the conclusion, which it's my least favorite of the season, which I wasn't really anticipating for this matchup of all ones, but it is so shockingly bare bones that they just reduce it down to Jason is just more harder to kill. I wasn't really expecting much from it, but I would have liked, I don't know, like an actual status to show Jason's unrelenting brute force against Michael's, which while he still does have it, is not nearly as impressive as Jason's, or maybe mention their other advantages, like how Michael is more smarter than Jason, which yes, they do say in the tab, but they never say that audibly, they just put it on the tab, and it just makes the whole thing feel so barren.
And like I touched earlier on, maybe they could have mentioned some of the ways Jason could have killed Michael without directly chopping into him, like possession.
And ultimately, that's the big thing. They didn't really go much deeper than absolutely necessary with the post-analysis of this fight, and it can be pretty disappointing. Honestly, this fight fell a little bit from where I originally placed it, and I can understand why Hyper has it placed as low as he does.
And I just want to make this clear, I didn't go in to just hate this episode, because, well, for one, I was just really excited for it. One of my most wanted matchups was happening, and, well, I don't really say this much, but considering what's happened with my other previous most wanted matchups in DB, I was hoping this would be different and finally be one where I would be satisfied with it after for so long of just being kind of underwhelmed or disappointed with the end product. This was unfortunately the biggest disappointment to be all. It is the most disappointing episode in the entire show for me, and my least favorite of the season, and I was really hoping this episode was going to break the curse, but it only continued it, unfortunately, and I'm hoping maybe one day that it could finally be different, but for now, this is what we're stuck with, and it's really a shame.
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same page with Hyper here. This was the episode I was looking the most forward to in this entire season. And yeah, there's something that depressed me. From the missed opportunities to having a live action fight again after so long, to all the weird and questionable choices in the animation, everything just fell flat in the end.
Ultimately, yeah, this episode was definitely disappointing in a lot of areas. Hopefully, it isn't a pattern for my Most Wanted as well.
Well, I'm glad that's over and done with. Now we can finally go trick or treat and wait its march. Hello. I would like a dinner reservation for 3.
A dinner reservation? What's that for?
Oh, I'm going to Olive Garden. You're not invited. All right, bye. Watch the place while we're gone.
Okay. So yeah, this one was certainly a surprise. This was the episode to come out right after the break. And just to be honest, it wasn't what most people expected for either combatant.
Well, ever since the Champions poll came out, we now know at least why James was pitted against John.
I'm going to stand by the fact that I think 47 is a better opponent for either one of them, but I can get behind this one too, to be fair.
When this matchup first got revealed, I was thinking, oh, so this is what they're doing with James, huh? Maybe they're just gonna, limit him to one specific version to make it more fair for John. Nope.
No!
They're going full composite. They're giving Bond everything, from the movies, to the books, to even some of the games.
Realistically, they probably could have restricted it to just the Daniel Craig timeline and had that be a decently fair fight. I mean, he has games he can pull from.
So it really just seems unfair to Rick, especially since this movie series isn't finished yet. Yeah, I know they don't really care about waiting for characters to be finished nowadays.
For better or worse.
It's always worse.
But still, it really just makes things really uneven for John.
And that translates into the episode itself, as it really does heavily favor Bond. Like, when you just compare the analysis, it just feels like there's so much more that's covered for Bond. Admittedly, it is really well done, and it shows a lot of care put into the character, analyzing his vast history, weapons, and overall story. And I did really enjoy it, but for Wick, while I wouldn't say it was bad, it just felt lesser in comparison, especially with how they just keep dropping all of Bond's movies titles in both analyses.
We'll live to die another day. Casino Royale, from Russia with Love, Majesty's Secret Service. Octopussy!
I never really noticed it at first because I haven't really watched any of Bond's movies, but when it was pointed out to me, it just feels kind of unbalanced in that way. While it didn't bug me as much as others, I do wish it was more balanced on both sides rather than leaning towards one way.
Well, I thought it was a cute little reference. And I mean, besides, it's not like John has many movie titles to drop.
Bond favoritism aside, you know that they were really stretching for material when they had to reference Keanu Reeves in real life, just practicing martial arts for the movie. Seems a bit odd when you had to go that deep, when the other solution was probably just waiting a bit until that information is more available.
Okay, now I'm going to mention something that we haven't really addressed for this season. Because of copyright issues, they no longer have end clips at the end of their analysis. Which is a shame, because this is the episode that probably would have benefited the most of it. I mean, you can literally have an end with him saying his most iconic line.
I only need one round. Golden gun.
No, not that one.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
That one.
At the end of the day, though, they are just end clips, and while it is sad to see him gone, they're not a major factor in the episode. What is a major factor is the animation, which,
It looks like Gmod.
yeah, the start of this animation is very rough. The models are low quality, Bond looks like he's not even walking, but more just sliding across the floor, and just general uneasiness, as well as the following scuffle just looking terrible. But the rest of it's pretty good.
The thing that makes this fight stand out from other 3D episodes is that this one seems a lot more plot-centric. Many people have commented on this before, but the way that it's structured makes it feel like it's more than just these two characters meeting for the first time just for the sake of fighting. It feels more like these worlds are connected, and Bond's sent on a mission to get rid of John Wick.
Get away from me! Why are you chasing me? Stop it! Get back here so you can get away from me!
I like basically everything about this episode from a writing standpoint. It's mainly the animation that brings it down, but when it goes down, it goes down.
Yeah, it's no secret that this episode has a lot of janky animations. Oh no! Although, a good bit of the choreography is solid. It's solid enough.
Frankly, I just think it's cool that they include most of James's gadgets. Okay, yeah, he doesn't have the cloaking device, or the landmines, or the spy robot, but he has the laser watch, the clicking pen, and even his freaking car. I mean, that's pretty awesome, right? They make for some great animation potential, and they utilize them perfectly here, or at least to a serviceable degree.
I mean, there were a lot of other gadgets they didn't use, but the variety that they had was definitely good. The voice acting was also pretty good. I'd say both of them sounded decently alike to their characters.
Especially the John Wick voice actor. And before the fight starts, you know who James is talking to? It's Liam who's cueing him in on how to win the episode.
Ha ha, fuck you.
Speaking of stuff that sounds good, Secret Services. That sounds very wrong, but I'm gonna keep going. Whatever the track name's called, it's very good, both on its own and as a backing track. Although it is a bit Bond-centric, but hey, what isn't in this time and age, right fellas?
But yeah, this fight was a lot more grounded, although it definitely still had a bit of spectacle, some of which is kind of counter to what they said in the analyses, admittedly. Namely, you have this one epic shot of Wick blocking against all of the bullets of the machine gun from Bond's car, right? This high-velocity Gatling gun, he blocks it with the sleeves of his suit. Bond takes out a pistol and shoots directly through the armored suit, seemingly effortlessly.
After Wick gets shot like that in a way that frankly just doesn't make sense, he charges towards Bond and it looks like it's supposed to lead up to a fake out or at least a moment where Wick gets an advantage, but it just leads to nothing. If anything, towards the end of the fight, as soon as he gets shot, it feels like he's all but give it up. As soon as he grabs Bond, he does nothing for the rest of the fight, which admittedly is brief, but it feels like there's something missing here.
Now, positives, though. The actual finishing blow was pretty cool, with the car shooting Wick in the back, only for Bond to kick him onto the car, knock the chandelier down with the laser, and have it plummet directly onto the very dejected Wick.
Yeah. Oh, no one likes me. My dog won't even look at me. My dog took a shit on the floor because they were so disgusted with me. God, no one's ever gonna...
Yeah, no, he definitely felt like he gave up.
And then the phone of himself and his wife powers down, which but originally was supposed to be a photo that got burned early on, but then would burn right next to Wick as he finally dies out, which I felt would have hit more than the phone, but it's still alright.
I personally prefer the phone, but that's neither here nor there.
And there's some other highlights in the fight, like the iconic James Bond shot, some good hand-to-hand choreography, implements of his gadgets, especially the car, which I really didn't see coming, but that was neat. And while the fight does start very rough, it does pick up quickly after, and there are a few hiccups here and there, but overall I think it was a pretty good package, and one, while it isn't very high for me, I could say I quite enjoyed for what it is.
Overall, this episode was rough around the edges, but it's not like it's entirely bad. Like we said, the writing is probably one of the best of the season, and you can't take that away from it. What you can take away is the fact that John Wick apparently isn't even bullet timing. Really? That's pathetic. I could do bullet timing just fine. Alright everyone, get ready. On the count of 3. What? Oh!
You guys ever wonder how Red stays calm all the time?
I don't know. Why don't you ask him?
Hey Red, how do you stay calm all the time? So, Jonathan versus Tanjiro. This is a matchup that most people were expecting for Tanjiro. I mean, you had pretty much all the connections right on the silver platter for both of these. They're very on the nose, I would say.
On that note, I find it really funny how many people I saw who just didn't ever notice those connections. But either way, Tanjiro was one of the teased characters, so it's about what I expected.
Speaking of, Death Battle really wanted to just get rid of every single teased character one after the other, after the other, after the other again, one more time, then the matchup that set the community on fire. I don't know why they did that, I just found it really funny. And the season where all the matchups felt more casual oriented, it's a nice change of pace to see one that seems a lot more oriented towards the people who are deeper into the community. As Brett said, not many casuals knew about this matchup being a thing, which I find really odd, especially since This is JoJo? How does the casual community not know something about JoJo?
So anyway, moving on into the actual episode. Tanjiro's analysis was alright, but it felt a little bit hampered down by the fact that they were trying to avoid spoilers wherever they could.
Only to spoil anyway, and then they had to cut out Boomstick saying the word spoilers after they realized, oh shit. Which is still the funniest part of the episode, hands down. Aside from that, yeah, in an attempt to avoid spoilers, it just kind of leaves Tanjiro feeling incomplete. Some of the most important stuff about him feels skimmed over, both in the versus context and in the actual story context. Like, they don't even want to mention that Tanjiro actually beats Muzan for some reason.
And then you can certainly feel the lack of end clips as it ends just abruptly with just a no-ski jump scare.
While Tanjiro's analysis suffered from them not wanting to spoil anything and things feeling really neutered, Jonathan's analysis is the complete opposite. They pretty much cover everything, from his story to all the way to his unfortunate death. Jonathan's personality and hormone abilities are greatly talked about in vivid detail. Nothing is really left out, and that's probably because of how short Jonathan's story generally is compared to everyone else in JoJo, which allows them to cover everything. They start off with his childhood, how much of a rough time he had, and his hormone abilities. Since hormone is pretty much Jonathan's bread and butter, they go into vivid detail about all the different effects and ways he has to mess with people. And we get some sweet sound effects during the analysis too, like Jonathan's ora ora ora. They also talk about other hormone users he could scale to, like Joseph. And this is where it's very apparent that, yeah, Jonathan is most likely gonna stomp.
One more thing before we get into the fight. In Tanjiro's analysis, there's a Pickle Rick joke, and then in Jonathan's analysis, you get the two nickel analogy. Many people speculated that this was a subtle sign to do versus Rick being a thing, which is really funny in retrospect, and I don't know why people fell for it, myself included.
And then it ends off with how Jonathan laid down the groundwork for the legacy of the JoJo bloodline, which is really well done. And then they ended off with a JoJo meme, because why not?
Fight opens up in a nice field with a not so nice confrontation as Jonathan is trying to kill women, based, but Tanjiro doesn't want that, so obviously he has to die.
Okay, so Jonathan is threatening Nezuko, thinking that she's one of Dio's minions. I mean, understandable mistake, but Tanjiro, this would be a great time to de-escalate the situation, I think. But instead, he implies that Jonathan is stupid, and then the fight begins.
Oh, he's kind of adorable! Like a puppy!
He literally tried to kill your sister.
The fight itself has some very good hand-drawn elements. I think it's probably one of the best in this season. They look very natural, and they look straight out of Demon Slayer. And the effects too for Harmon is also very nicely animated, and it really just hits hard. The sound design is pretty good too.
I will say the water effects don't look nearly as good as the fire effects on Tanjiro's sword, but they're still not bad.
Now, the action is fast-paced and it keeps you at the edge of your seat. There's no really slow moments, and every hit feels impactful. Tanjiro is shown to be generally the much more skilled swordsman, which is something that they do mention in the analysis, so that's a nice little detail. But Jonathan is generally shown to be the stronger and much faster, like when it's just punch barrels in Tanjiro, and you can see Tanjiro just having trouble keeping up.
Speaking of which, the two VAs, they're really good. Tanjiro does a really good job for the few episodes I did see of him, capturing his shouts and his mannerisms in the anime, along with all of his shouting for his moves and things like that. It's really well done. Jonathan is the star of the show though. He captures everything about the character, from his inflections to his gentleman nature, and especially his battle cries whenever he says one of his moves. It feels like he's on the verge of always breaking his lungs, and it really just elevates each scene much more.
One could say it's even the Joe star of the show.
Does he know?
For me, the sprites look kind of rough. Tanjiro's is easier to point out. For me, I thought it was the size of his head that was the issue, but it looks like his hands are too big. The proportions make it look a tad uncanny. Not really complemented by the fact that there's some really jank shots in the animation. Not enough to absolutely ruin it, but when you notice them, they really stick out.
Yeah, the motions in particular can look pretty awkward depending on how they're framed. But on that note, the choreography was pretty alright, especially near the end, and extra especially with Tanjiro doing the fake out. That was genuinely exciting, and made it feel like, for a second, even as a versus debater, I was like, is Tanjiro about to win? But then you have Jonathan do the extra fake out by moving his own lungs.
Which is absolutely the most JoJo way possible for Jonathan to get out of a sticky situation, which is really sick.
You know what also sick? The Hamon barrage at the end of the fight. Jonathan is just going ham on Tanjiro's body and just punching that guy right into the tree. And Tanjiro decides now to tell him that Nezuko was his sister.
And then the waterworks open up! And yeah, no, this one kind of kills a little bit of the tension and emotion, because Jonathan's reaction is just so over the top. Crying, sure, but it was so immediate.
Jonathan is definitely a sensitive guy, and he definitely feels for most of his opponents, even Dio, but it's not in such an over-the-top way that they present it. It's more subtle about it, so it just kind of seems very jarring to his character.
Although they do follow it up with a genuinely heartfelt ending. It's just kind of sad to watch, even. I'm impressed by that, genuinely. I think this is favorite ending of a death battle this season for me.
I do like the direction they went with, and yeah, it is a bit awkward in places, but generally, I still really enjoyed it, especially with the bit at Nezuko at the end, and it makes it just come across as sort of a crossover sort of feel, which I generally do like seeing in these episodes whenever they attempt to. And the music definitely helps with the emotional end. Oh yeah, the track. Yeah, it's really good. It's definitely one that tries to sync up more to the fight rather than a standalone, but it still definitely works on its own, with its somber starts at the beginning and end, and the more high energy parts, including the JoJo theme, which is a neat reference. And I do find myself going back and listening to the higher energy and catchier parts of the song. So yeah, really solid overall. And then we had the post-analysis, which is perfectly serviceable. A rip bozo for Tanjiro over here.
And yeah, that's pretty much the episode. There's definitely a lot of flaws that make it look like the episode's about to fall apart, but then it does something really, really good, and it puts itself back together. It just kind of gets back up, and it just keeps going forward. And honestly, there's a lot of undeniable charm to that. So while it's definitely not a favorite of mine, I'd never really have any issue coming back to this episode, even if there are some problems in it, like Tanjiro's analysis and the beginning of the end. Red, so how did you unexplode?
It's simple. You see, I just...
Oh, hey, Hyper, look at your favorite.
And for my next trick, I'm going to disappear.
So when we first saw the teaser and we saw Scarlet Witch, we all know who she was fighting. Here's the mandatory Marvel vs. DC fight of the season. This probably should have been announced last year, due to WandaVision being a thing back then.
But instead they decide to line it up with the much less well-received Multiverse of Madness, which can't win them all. You might have noticed that Speedy is the only reason this one got ahead of Tanjiro vs. Jonathan, but I'll let him explain his take on it.
So, let me explain why this episode is so dear to me. I want you to keep in mind, this matchup in itself wasn't really that special to me. The best I was expecting from it was a really good fight, considering these are two magical sorcerers. So, because of that, you could do a lot of stuff with it. But I think the analysis for both of these has been greatly underappreciated. I also think this episode has the best build-up for both of the characters. Look at Wanda's analysis, for example. The way they describe her at the beginning, asking the question if a single person could control all of reality, last to the minute detail. It's just a hype way to build up someone like Scarlet Witch.
Oh shit!
I think that's the best way they could have done it too. The rest of her run is also very interesting. With how much they cover of her story, all from the beginning to House of M, into details about the retcons of her backstory, made everything very digestible. Which is something I always am glad that they do for these comic book characters with so much history behind them.
No, oh hell no! No, turn it off! Turn it off!
Also, this episode is one of the first times Jocelyn just appears. decides to butt in on both Scarlet Witch and Zatanna's rundowns.
A lot of people say that Wanda's analysis was just overshot by Zatanna. I frankly disagree. The edits and story breakdown is just very underrated in my opinion. It might sound like I'm overselling. At the same time, it's kind of refreshing to have such a comprehensible analysis with a lot of entertaining visuals to go with. There's not like any specific or Lex vs. Doom levels of editing, but they're still good. And that always makes comic book episodes a lot of fun for me.
Zatanna's analysis is definitely the show stealer for a lot of people, although that's mostly down to the fact that I think Zatanna's just a more likable character for most people.
I mean, you know you're a good character, and someone that works for DC marries a cosplayer dressed as you. No, that's actually true. The way they build her up over time with all of her abilities and just easily crushing reality is definitely an interesting way to go about it. It really helps sell what both combatants are capable of, especially Zatanna. But what most people remember about Zatanna's analysis is just her fun personality. Now, I'm not trying to say that this episode is like super spectacular or that it's undersell. It's just that I think most people just overlook it. It's definitely something I think more people should pay attention to, and not just undersell because of Wanda's analysis.
Bro, this is boring. I just wanted to see the magic tricks already.
Speaking of which, yeah, the fight starts with Zatanna doing a magic show and accidentally summoning Scarlet Witch, I guess.
It just kind of happens, and you're going to have to accept that, and you're going to have to accept what happens from here on out.
Also, I've said this in the past, I'll remain by it. Don't like letterboxing. I wish they didn't go for it with this one.
Now, as soon as you hear Wanda speaking, you can kind of tell that they're going with early MCU Wanda, which had a really thick accent.
You, what sort of 2-bit sorceress do you think you are?
2-bit!
I'm not sure why DB did this, but it's an interesting decision to say the least. Zatanna is voiced by Lauren Mayfield, who just sounds like she's having the time of her life as Zatanna.
The fight starts pretty low octane, just some chains, telekinesis, before Zatanna turns into a bunch of bunnies and Zatanna scratches up Wanda's face. Jesus Christ! Before Wanda turns her into a bunch of the Death Battle playing cards. Buy it at your local Rooster Teeth store in America.
Anyway, here's Superman. And also, here's the make or break deal about the entire episode. It seems that basically, do you enjoy this one sequence that takes up a good portion of the episode? If not, you're probably not going to like the episode. It's a cool concept and all, but people came to this episode to watch Scarlet Bitch versus Zatanna, not the Justice League versus the Avengers. And that is kind of where my line is drawn. Again, it's a neat idea, but after seeing it for the first time, the novelty wears off quick, and you just kind of feel like, man, you get some cool sequences here and there, like the universe juggling, which, by the way, doesn't seem to have much impact, even though animation-wise, these are the strongest characters in the entire show. But you really don't think about that because of the lack of impact, and not much versatility given the characters involved.
I'm gonna have to disagree here, honestly. I think Wanda and Zatanna both get to use a lot of their spells there. So this definitely didn't feel like another Strange vs. Fate scenario where both combatants would rather shit-talk each other than cast spells. So both combatants not being that versatile, I would disagree with. Though I will definitely agree that the impacts on certain attacks, especially the universe destruction part, could definitely feel more impactful as a whole.
Oh yeah, the Universal stuff. Yeah, after she makes a Megamind reference, Zatanna just decides to do that.
Well, so much for the letterboxing then. But in all seriousness, that was a very cool shot. You kind of see it coming, admittedly, once the screen tilts from the bunnies, but it's still super extra. I can get behind it.
On the topic of extra, Wanda's voice actress really went all in with that scream near the end. After getting hit in the head 3 times by balls.
Literal universes.
Balls. She decides to scream at the top of her lungs, no more sound. Which, at this point, this is where my heart sank, because I thought she won.
However, in the biggest comeback in DB history, it turns out that Zatanna was just playing 5D chess with Wanda the entire time!
Yeah, and on that note, the track is really good at emphasizing the action throughout the fight. It even has a side before coming back as Zatanna takes the lead. Turns out, as mentioned in the analysis, she doesn't actually need to say her spells backwards. By the way, that was a cool effect throughout the entire fight that we didn't mention yet. She can just think them, which seals the end for Scarlet Witch.
And a body on the stage that people are disappointed, like, Jesus Christ, you guys need to get locked up.
For some reason, Satana looks like Rico in this one hand-drawn shot here.
Her arms are so big.
Now, let's get into the post-analysis. They decided to put Marvel's and DC's cosmologies equal in size. Some people might say, oh wait, that's just a total cop-out. But really, do you want them to talk about cosmology for 10 minutes?
Although their reasoning for siding with Zatanna could be seen as a little bit awkward for some people. They basically just say that Wanda is less mentally stable and therefore she would lose.
It was also because she had better experience, but who cares about that, am I right? Despite being the most shoe-in Marvel vs. DC fight of the season, it's still fun, it's imaginative, though the fight could have been longer, and Zatanna is definitely the highlight of this episode, but that doesn't mean that Wanda's parts are boring by any means. But overall, it's a great episode. Rewatch it, maybe you'll like it more, maybe you'll like it less. Just rewatch it.
Meanwhile, the other three of us, including the guy who left this entire segment, think it's average, just there. Many people just kind of remember this episode because the Town of One, which seems to be the biggest pop-off of the century for a lot of people.
Guys, I have a confession. I'm gonna keep it 100% real talk. I'm a finna give...
No.
It's about time, it's about power. We stay hungry, we devour. Put in the work, put in the hours it takes. What's ours? Like it's born in my veins, my culture banging was strange. I change it, so what's my motherfucking name?
So, remember how I said Scarlet Witch vs. Zatanna was the shoe-in Marvel vs. DC fight for this season? Well, yeah, here's another one, which is funny because they're both right next to each other in the ranking. Huh, how about that? Since the DVX and the FL cast did so well for this matchup, this was just an inevitability. And, how did it go?
I'd say pretty good, overall. This matchup definitely has fallen off from my original viewing, but I still find the majority of it pretty cool.
This matchup is Marvel vs. DC. You know how much I like those. You can tell by how much I said in the last one. Although I guess I have a little bit more stake because it has The Rock. And that makes it mildly amusing for me.
Speaking of which, might as well get this out of the way right now. They actively attempted to use The Rock in 2 different thumbnails and succeeded. And I don't know how to feel about that.
And also another reason is because people have decided to just make this matchup an event, where pretty much the majority of people in the community just came in and watched the episode in suits for no reason. And I find it very amusing that they did it for this one, but not for the previous one.
It was for a very good reason.
I do agree, actually.
Going in, I only knew Black Adam for being the evil version of Shazam, because the character roster of Injustice Gods Among Us told me so.
I have returned.
But I'm honestly shocked to see that that's really not the case. At best, it's a gross oversimplification. But in reality, Black Adam as a character is just incredibly patriotic to a fault. Doesn't really care about morality, and I really like that unique kind of mindset where being good or evil doesn't really matter. As long as the country's safe, he'll do what he has to do. It generally gets me invested in him as a character. And then I learned he got a lantern ring, and then I got flashbacks.
Black Adam's character is probably a highlight of this episode, because I definitely think that was the popular conception of him. Most people didn't know much more other than he was the Black Shazam.
Interestingly enough, Shazam's powers and Black Adam's powers are different, at least now, because Black Adam uses the Egyptian gods rather than the traditional Greek mythology ones. This means that his power set, while somewhat similar, does have some differences. with the main difference being Black Adam's willpower, and they keep highlighting him as a character who never gives up no matter the circumstances. This will be important later, trust me. Overall, this rundown just gets me genuinely invested in the character, and it makes me want to root for him in the episode, which was probably a bad idea in retrospect.
Black Adam's analysis does lack a little bit of actual good direct feats for him. Yeah, he pushed the moon, and that's it. Yeah, they mentioned he could break the Spectre, but they don't really go into much detail about how powerful that Spectre is. Even in Scarlet Witch vs. Zatanna, where they put both combatants equal in stats, which they do here too, they go at least into some notable feats, comparing them to Universe Busters, having notable examples of strength and durability for them.
This analysis kind of feels predicated on the notion that whoever's watching already knows stuff about DC, because if you don't, then you have no real way of directly knowing how powerful the quintessence beings are. That's the main problem here. If it is one for you, that is.
And it isn't for me because I really don't care much for stats in these episodes. Like, as long as it's presented well, then I don't really mind. And with how often they just use Marvel and DC, I kind of just assume it's the same thing that they've used for them previously. I really don't have that much stake in it, and it doesn't bug me as much as others.
Now, Apocalypse or Ensub or Norse analysis. There they actually go into some notable feats and abilities for him. Not that they didn't do that for Black Adam, but here they go into more detail about it. Like how he can go toe-to-toe with the Jolly Green Universe Buster Hulk or Thor. And everything just feels like they give him more concrete stuff to work with, compared to Black Adam. This makes one side feel a lot more uneven to the other. Despite not knowing much about Apocalypse's character, hearing some of Apocalypse's dabble into celestial text and his cyber wires was new and kind of cool to hear, since that's not something I really knew about him. Yeah, so good on Death Power for that.
Also here we got a callback to the Mutant Jesus joke, so that's fun.
Still loses to Booster Gold.
So the fight opens up, and we get something that no other Marvel vs. DC fight has done up to this point, which it just seems really questionable now that I think about it. It has a comic aesthetic going on, showing panels with the sequence of events that's about to lead up to the battle, which I just think is really cool. Only it doesn't really overstay its welcome, because it only appears in the beginning and the end.
To be fair, it feels like this season in general was trying to go for new ideas. Not every episode has that sort of stuff going on, but you see it with Scarlet Witch vs. Zatanna's fourth wall breaking. You see it with Omni-Man vs. Homelander's tone.
I'm gonna rip you in half now.
That is such a juggernaut thing to say.
You see it with Hercules vs. Sun Wukong's entire animation style. It seems like they were trying to experiment a lot more with this season compared to previous ones.
Well, I would say that this aesthetic here is definitely a success, and I would like to see it in more episodes, just so long as it doesn't overstay its welcome.
As for what's actually going on, we have an invasion on Black Adam's home country. It sets up this kind of hero, well, I guess in this case anti-hero versus villain dynamic, setting up this sort of duel from the ruler trying to protect his country from the conqueror Apocalypse, which I really dig when I wasn't really expecting much from it. All elevated by the legendary Fallen Gods. It's a pretty good banger of a rap track on its own, fitting the two really well, but man, these lyrics! This went viral in the community and was absolutely hilarious, and well, I'm just gonna show you a few examples.
Such a pest, I'm powerful, I punch the best. Shift my arm to a big drill, I'm harming ya.
The track leaves a very strong first impression, just with its energy more than anything else. And the animation doesn't slouch either.
So we talked about the track, now let's get into the two combatants themselves. In this corner we have Apocalypse, who is kind of hard to understand in this fight.
You're corrupt. Remember, angel, tough, atom.
Yeah, you see, they kind of use a voice filter on him, and it makes his lines a little incomprehensible.
Both voice actors sound good, it's just that the voice filter can cause problems for some people. Personally, I can understand him fine, but I can see where issues would arise. With their first actual clash, you get to see how much impact this animation has, although you also get to see some of the jank it has right out the gate, with Apocalypse awkwardly positioning his hand to try and intercept Adam's punches, immediately followed up by a hand-drawn sequence which, while it's drawn well, definitely feels jarring spliced in the middle of all the sprite work.
They get some cool clashes, energy beams, and all that sort of stuff, which is then followed up by Adam punching a hole right through Apocalypse's chest. And a nice little detail there is that you can hear a voice in the background saying, which is a Hootie talking to Black Adam.
And also, just because it's the same color as the rest of Apocalypse's body, it took me a while to even realize that that was the Death Seed right there. But then Apocalypse really starts to counter Black Adam, telling him,
Your counsel will aid you no longer.
and this is kind of where the fight shifts to be almost entirely in Apocalypse's favor.
Sure, Adam tries his best, but then you get moments like him getting dogpiled by the robots, unable for him to fight back. Which just kind of feels very much like that one moment where Lex is stuck in the rocks, unable to do anything. It just makes him look way weaker than anything else. After he puts on the ring, it looks like they're on equal footing, but then Apocalypse just kind of absorbs everything there. But after that one, Black Adam gives his most powerful Shazam attack, and Apocalypse just kind of regrows from that one instantly. There's never really a moment where Apocalypse looks like he's in that much danger after the Death Seed punch, which just kind of kills my enjoyment a good bit.
With that said, though, there are still some cool moments in the fight, like Black Adam's raw line as he puts on the lantern ring, Apocalypse going giant size and just eclipsing the whole city with his shadow. It looks absolutely incredible, and Black Adam just charges in head first, completely fearless, all for the sake of protecting his country. It's all really well done, and the following scuffle, while brief, is still pretty cool.
And by brief, we mean a solid 3 seconds before Black Adam is swatted like a fly. I remember that one part in the analysis where they talk about how Black Adam never gives up to the point where it's seen as its own little superpower? Well, here, immediately after he gets swatted down and uses the Shazam attack, he just gives up. Why? They go and backpedal that one crucial part of Black Adam's character for the sake of a one-liner, and that's probably the most disappointing part of this entire episode, on top of all of the missed potential. At least for me. The one-liner in itself, it's funny, I guess, the first time around. As funny as the track was, anyway.
Speaking of which, the death was one of the most brutal deaths in Death Battle, and especially of this season. The singular stomp was bad enough, shattering the camera, but then just the repeated stomping of Black Adam's half-dead body is almost disturbing, more so than anything else in the season for me personally.
Stop! He's already dead!
Not that that's explicitly a bad thing, I think it goes really hard.
Repeatedly stomping on the person who used the lantern ring. Oh, and then the face he contorts after he would get stomped on was inspired by Beavis and Butthead. Have fun with this knowledge. And then we get this really sinister ending as Apocalypse shows that Black Adam failed to defeat him and protect his country, as the last thing he sees is his city falling before the might of Apocalypse, and he finishes him off with his own lightning.
I'll be crying if I look like that too, bro. That's fucked up what they be doing to y'all.
The post-analysis left me a bit confused. Not because of anything I disagree with, but more or less how they worded stuff. I've heard from some people that the deficit is something that he doesn't actually have. It's more or less an alternate version of Apocalypse that uses it. And it's not really mainline 616 Apocalypse that uses the deficit that much. So if that's true, then that's kind of weird that they gave him the deficit, but all these minor hiccups I have with the post-analysis, it's not something that's detrimental to my overall enjoyment of this episode. Because it is a pretty good episode. I wish the fight itself could have been longer and Black Adam could have done more, but as it is, I still think it's a pretty solid episode.
Well, that was nice. We still need to ride home, though.
No way, is that Black Adam versus Apocalypse Marvel Comics X?
Goku, Vegeta, Goku, Vegeta, Donkey Kong, defend.
How did they get away with using the same character twice in a single season?
Hey guys, have you heard of this really cool anime called Dragon Ball? You want to see an episode based on it? Boom, you got one. You see that? Thor versus Vegeta. Pretty epic, right? You liked that, didn't you? Okay, you want another one? You want another one? Alright then, how about Trunks versus Silver? You like that one, don't you? You do? Oh, you want another one? You want more? Alright, how about we get you not one, but two in the same episode for the season finale? Gogeta versus Vegito. Goku twice, Vegeta twice, technically 3 times this season. You like that? Don't you love it? You know you love it. So yeah, the finale is Gogeta versus Vegito.
If you didn't hear, we were all just so enthusiastic about this. Right after Deku versus Asta, need I remind you, one of the worst episodes to me as a whole. And then you see this matchup right after, and it just fills you with so much optimism, and you totally don't want to go into a Denny's parking lot and alter your life choices in a way you can't take back.
Well, that aside, yeah, this matchup. Okay, unlike most people, I wouldn't be too opposed for this happening as a Death Battle episode. But why the finale? In a season about introducing new franchises, you end it with quite possibly one of the most overused franchises in DB history. I really wish it was something else, but the episode itself was alright enough.
Putting aside my thoughts on the episode itself, when I first saw this revealed, I was just confused. Why do we have a same series matchup for a finale? And why is it in a show that's all about crossover versus? Yes, they've done it in the past, but they were either A, really early on, where they were just getting their footing started, or B, a sponsor tie-in episode. So, yeah, no, this was just done just because. And I'm just gonna say it because, just because, I think this is the worst matchup in the entire show's history, with the exception of the episode that nobody likes.
But Hyper, you have it at number 2.
Yes, I do, but again, my thoughts on the matchup differ from what I think of it as an actual episode. I've already established that before, and personally, I just did not care for it, and I completely forgot about it for most of the waiting time, because I was focused on other things. And yeah, it was just there, and God, just the very concept, like, yes, I know it's a big thing within the community of Dragon Ball, it's a big debate, and in that sense, I do think it is pretty cool. But in the context of Death Battle, especially in this season, absolutely not. It is just so mind-numbingly dull. They are literally just the same character with a few different moves and have almost no plot or story to go over. So yeah, a long story short, I wasn't looking forward to this, and so were a lot of other people. And in terms of reception, well, if you see our number placements, yeah, it is just all over the place.
The analysis was...
In my opinion, the analyses were pretty good. I like how both of them start the exact same way, emphasizing the fact that they're basically the same idea.
Oh, he's just like me. He's just like me, for real, for real. They kind of frame it in a way how most Dragon Ball fans probably saw these two characters. So, it's definitely a lot of Dragon Ball fan service, which will become important later.
As a Dragon Ball fan, yeah, it does appeal to my biases. I really dug it. I do like the feeling it gives off of just seeing the fusions for the first time and trying to go into the debate of like, oh, who would really win, and even kind of changing up the format with how they present arguments for both at the end, and then they will just compare the two by the end and who they side with, which I was really caught off guard by, and yeah, I really like that.
Admittedly, knowing Dragon Ball and being able to recognize this fan service is going to impact your enjoyment quite a bit. Again, as someone who is not a Dragon Ball enjoyer personally, it didn't really hit that hard for me in a lot of areas. I generally liked the format as well, though.
Making it a full composite is just kind of weird.
Yeah, it makes it so that they literally scale to the same stuff, so any differences between them are negligible. Arguably, that might be in the spirit of the debate as a whole, but it definitely makes it feel weirder. But yeah, that's basically it. Both the analyses are about the same.
Well, that's what you get when they're basically the same character. Though credit where it's due, the setup, I think, is probably one of my favorites of the season because it starts before the animation does. Because they just kind of summons Shenron to have the fusions show up face to face. In that brief moment before they fuse, you get to see those character moments that I really do like about Dragon Ball and their dynamic exemplified, even if it's brief. and then they fuse, and I just kind of tune out the entire time.
Before we go any further, though, let's talk about the voice actors. Nani Pator comes back as Vegeta, and Michael Kovac is Goku, which is fitting because he also voiced Goku back in Reverse Smash vs. Goku Black. Something that does bug me a bit is that they try to make him sound like a bridge Goku, which is weird because Ben has said he tries to move away from a bridge Goku and find someone who sounds more like Sean Schemmel. So at that point, why don't you just get Masako X again? But on that note,
how does the fight stack up? It doesn't. At least in my opinion. Hyper really likes it, but he could talk about it later. The entire animation is just so boring to me. Things just kind of happen, they go through the motions, yet none of the attacks really feel all that impactful, and the ones that feel like they're set up to just kind of act as a screen transition, and as they go to different locations. And yes, I recognize those locations. I just think it's kind of dumb. I understand this is supposed to be a reference to them breaking through dimensions, but here it acts more so as teleportation. Except debatably for Snake Road, but even then, why transport there? I don't see much rhyme or reason for so much of this episode to happen, at least in terms of the sequences. Like, take the time where they used to fake out Kamehameha, and it just kind of leads to that big attack for Gogeta, right? Except Vegeta just kind of stands there. Moments like that just kind of feel really forced, and it doesn't feel satisfying at all, even as a Dragon Ball fan. You get the beam clash that would usually be the climax for any episode. Here, they just kind of squeeze it out, and the beams don't even act like beams. They just do a glorified ki blast because you can see it leave their hands before the giant explosion, which again has no impact. And on top of all that, for the most part, all of this choreography is taken from other things. Same angle, same posture. There's a lack of originality in this episode that I just cannot get behind at all. I understand, again, it's supposed to be a tribute to Dragon Ball, but given how much they do, it feels less like a cute little reference and feels more like unoriginality.
Although I would say for things like super moves, it's understandable. I can definitely see that critique when just average moves are being lifted from different Dragon Ball media. Personally, I can say this one more time as a non-Dragon Ball watcher. Admittedly, it comes off as really cool and not much else, because it's cool and flashy choreography, interesting set pieces, and if I were to name one, the shot of Gogeta flying across the water at Kame's house is very slick.
I'm not going to deny that a lot of it is eye candy, because it is. That's just kind of how Dragon Ball as a franchise is these days. But I don't know, it just feels like all style and no real substance, which is incredibly concerning because we got 2 other Dragon Ball episodes that do have a good bit of meat to them, on top of being visually impressive. On top of the fact that this is supposed to be the finale and there's not much memorability to it at all for me, that stings really hard.
But remember, Gumball, Gogeta said they wanted to show some variety.
Gogeta fucking lied to my face. I'll never forgive him.
With all that said, though, yes, I can understand why people would view that episode this way. And to an extent, I do get it, even as a massive Dragon Ball fan. But here's the thing. I don't really care. I just have fun with it. It's just fan service, and admittedly, it's not anything else beyond that. And I don't know, I just got into it. I thought it was pretty fun. I just like all the neat references that they pull from all various Dragon Ball media, and just going through all the different locales and the history of Dragon Ball itself. And I don't know, I just find that really fun.
I just think it's neat, personally.
Yeah, just them battling out for the thrill of the battle, having the time of their lives, and going all big with their attacks, which all looks really stunning and visually pleasing to the eyes. And yeah, I'm a sucker for eye candy and just pure hype value, and yeah, I get a lot of that from this episode. And I just got really immersed into it all, and it just made it really fun to be. The big reason for me it got this high was mainly the ending. Oh, the ending. I'm aware, I know people have their issues with it, but I'm sorry, I just love it. And it just feels so climactic, because a big part of that thanks to the music, which Dragon Dance, it's very close, but on its own, I wouldn't say it's my favorite track. Definitely my second favorite, though. It's an absolute catchy bop that references Brandon Yates' Alive and Princess of Pride, and just carries that feeling of Dragon Ball throughout the entire ride, and it's just really enjoyable to listen to. But specifically the ending, and the way they mix the music to give it so much more impact, just feels powerful. I admittedly missed this the first time I watched it, but after on a rewatch and I first heard the Chala Het Chala, it just hit so hard for me. I just absolutely adored it. Gogeta tossing the Starburst, Vegeta laying out his Kamehameha and just blasting through it, and Gogeta just powering through to get out one last Dragon Fist, all just going higher and higher, and the VAs just absolutely shattering their vocal cords as they give one last final scream for the ultimate move. And in the end, barely, Vegito takes it up at the last possible second because he actually goes Kaioken if you paid attention. In the end, Vegito gives a fist bump to Gogeta for a hard-fought battle as he turns into dust, which I am 99% sure is a reference to Asura's Wrath, but we still don't know.
But yeah, ultimately, it was aesthetically nice. I just don't know how much substance I can gain from it, which I think that's generally the opinion of the majority.
This is how I would look at it. This is Dragon Ball fan service at its teeth. All the little cute references, the way they talk about both characters, and just the matchup itself, yeah, if you're a hardcore Dragon Ball fan, this is definitely something for you. But if you're someone like me, who has mainly been exposed to it by Abridged, and that's pretty much all you get from it, it's fine. It's not really bad or anything, just a lot of it's gonna fly over your head, because this is just made for Dragon Ball fans. It's kind of like how I would say I feel about some of the Red vs. Blue episodes. Extremely good for fans, only okay for people like me. I can definitely say the animation is superb. One of the best they've done in the season, 3D-wise at least. Also, fuck you guys for teasing me a Whis and Boomstick fusion and actually showing it. Not cool, dudes.
Hey, Red, look at these earrings. We know what they do.
Yo.
Should we do it, though? Should we?
Let's do it.
All right. We don't have ears. Huh. I feel ripped off. Alright guys, I gotta stop this right here. Before we continue this video, I need to tell you that this ranking is sponsored by Raid Shadow.
When are you going to run out of bullets?
Oh, I won't. Infinite ammo.
So, during the waiting period for Boba Fett vs. Redditor, we got a weird announcement coming from, I believe it was Liam, just flat out saying ahead of time, we're going to get a Warframe episode. And the consensus was, cool, what the fuck is a Warframe?
Now, this is one of the most interesting things to me, because Warframe is apparently a very popular series, just not in the same bubble as the Death Battle audience.
But hey, if it has spirits in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, it must be noteworthy, right?
We weren't really sure on what the Warframe matchup would be, and once it was announced, it was the very first Warframe against
Tor, inject Cyberpunk 2077 directly into my...
Now, the matchup itself, it's definitely an interesting choice for Raiden, but I can't really say I was expecting anything else for him. I thought his first matchup was alright enough, so I don't think most people had like any other stuff for Raiden at this point. But yeah, it kind of just vibes. That's it.
Ultimately, I'm not sure I wanted a Raiden run back, but I'm glad we got one. Personally, this will get me hung at the stake. I like this one a lot more.
Okay, that's it. You're losing your arms.
Ha! Joke's on you. I don't have any.
The setup for this episode is actually really unique, and I mean that in a really good way. Rather than it just being another day at the office, this time it's after hours, and Wiz is playing Warframe on the computer, which is one of the worst things you can do on a computer, in my opinion, especially when you're all alone. And changing the subject.
By the way, that is one of the worst PCs I've ever seen. Wiz should really think about an upgrade.
Boomstick walks in and he sees Wiz playing Warframe and he's like, what's your favorite Warframe? And then there's just a rundown on the dot, just like in Macho Man versus Kool-Aid Man, but way more organic.
I love the idea that these two know enough about characters that they can list these things off the top of their head.
And rather than just being like a versus sheet, at the beginning it's way more of a lore dump so that Boomstick can get educated about Warframe from a fan's perspective. I really like how this episode handles Warframe, treating it more like a fascination Wiz has rather than a paycheck that Warframe is giving these guys. And then when they go and talk about Raiden, it's more appreciating his character and the stuff he can do rather than treating it as a versus sheet. All the versus stuff is actually later when the two of them get into a calc off and talk about the many things they can do to clash against each other. And it's not until the fight is about to start where they realize, oh wait, we work at Death Battle. Everything about these rundowns, for the most part, is just stuff that I really appreciate, coming off a lot more as a fan-driven thing rather than an average Death Battle rundown. And I really hope if we get more sponsored episodes or special episodes in general, we can get something more like this, because you can feel the passion from it, and I really appreciate that.
I gotta say, the biggest highlight for me was, just Boomstick and Wiz interacting with each other. It's always nice to see them just casually talk with each other from time to time without them going at each other's throats, even though that's kind of what they do later. But here, it's more or less just trying to prove the other one wrong. It's almost like there's some sort of versus debater or some shit like that, but that would be ridiculous. No, I gotta say, one of my favorite moments in this episode, and I don't know why it gets me that much, is when Wiz realizes that Excalibur is a tiny bit slower and he just randomly swears. I don't know why, but that always gets me. It's just moments like these that kind of makes the episode so enjoyable for me. At least analysis-wise.
It is apt to compare this episode to something like Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man, because this episode characterizes Wiz and Boomstick very well. And that moment that Speedy just mentioned shows off Wiz realizing that he was in fact wrong about something.
It's always nice to see Boomstick being treated as more than a punchline machine.
Now, one little minor nitpick I have for the analysis of Raiden in particular is that they tried to cram in some meme references in there. Now, granted, I did have Reverse Slash versus Goku Black and Dio versus Alcon really high up for me last season, so it would be a bit hypocritical for me to criticize this episode for doing something that those episodes did. Difference there is that these just felt a lot more forced than those did. Here, we get the don't fuck with this Senator Armstrong reference, which I think would have been more fitting if we actually got Armstrong on the show. That's just me. Considering we got this episode during the meme resurgence of Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, I can't really blame the episode too much, but it's just a little minor nitpick I have.
Personally, the one that felt the most forced to me was at the very end, because that line does not work nearly as well in the third person.
So then they hit the button ready for you to get into the fight, and they immediately play a Warframe ad. Yeah. Well, obviously it didn't bother me on rewatches. When I first saw it, that definitely is gonna rub people the wrong way. Anyways, the actual fight is really good. This was all solo work by DA himself, which I was not really sure on how well that worked, but he pulled it off pretty well. Very fast-paced, high-octane, and just overall really fun.
Quick side note, they actually got 2 different storyboard artists for this one, which is abnormal for Death Battle. And also, time to mention that the voice actor they got for Raiden is a lot better than the old one from Wolverine vs. Raiden. They actually sound really similar to Quentin Flynn in a lot of their intonations. And they're a YouTuber who makes Ace Attorney memes. Some of you might be interested in that.
Excalibur is voiced by the same dude who did Jason and Michael. Pretty good performance. Really accurate. Gets the emotion across. Oh yeah, and VA for Lotus as well. Pretty good.
And now I can talk about the fight. So you know how last entry where I basically said that Gogeta versus Vegeta was really boring because it's high octane action and not much else? This is my number 2, by the way. Yeah, I hear all the criticism for how this is pretty much mindless and there's not much going on in terms of a sequence of events. Well, guess what? Fuck you. This is our list, and I'm the one who decides to be wrong this time. For me, almost everything about this animation is chef's kiss.
Ultimately, I do see why some people have an issue with the sword clashes. A lot of them are waving it in front of them, and you never get to see Raiden use his leg sword techniques.
But honestly, it's fine.
And while a lot of it is just mindless tweaking, they do fit in a few fun moments like the gag with the infinite ammo, the Metal Gear incoming calls, or Wiz the Boomstick actually interrupt the fight for a really funny scene.
One that pays off with Boomstick getting yet another W over Wiz. I'm really liking this trend. He is on his way to becoming an actual character again.
I do enjoy the effects in the episode as well. They're a bit simplistic, but I don't find an issue with that.
Honestly, from beginning to almost end, there's just so much going on, and I don't have any complaints about any of it. I know that there are some people who say that Raiden's characterization is like really, really bad. Hey, I have a question. I have a resident Metal Gear fan right here. He goes by Red Runner, but I just call him Red Guy. He's a diehard Metal Gear fan, and he disagrees with you. What about that?
So yeah, honestly, Raiden's characterization is fine. Him referencing the rules of nature, maybe that's a bit much. but I genuinely appreciate this more than his original interpretation in, again, Wolverine vs. Raiden. Maybe there could be touch-ups here and there, but ultimately, no, I see this as Raiden.
Pretty much everything about this episode has a redeeming quality to it, or it's just flat out fun. And that's why I have it at number 2. Why not number 1? Because the ending happens.
See, the storyboard was a decent bit different in a few places from the final product. Notably, when Raiden is dodging around Excalibur on the jetpack. In the animation, he just runs up the building, but in the storyboard was a callback to Metal Gear Rising. He was jumping across the missiles running towards Excalibur. That, I think, would have been a much more impactful scene. And then, even more egregiously, where you have Excalibur hit Raiden's sword with Galaxian, which, as they mention later, completely counters the high-frequency blade. Which, that seems like a perfect lead-in for Excalibur cutting straight through it, right? That's not at all what happens. No, he misses entirely and just cuts Raiden himself in half. In the storyboard, he cut through the sword, and the two halves fell around Excalibur at the end. As it stands, it feels like a pointless thing to even use Galaxian at all.
One minor blemish pales in comparison to the quality of the rest of the episode. I just don't understand why people have it so low or see it as so hated. I, for one, to see this really misunderstood. And then these three, they see it as alright. And you know what? I can accept that.
Hey, number 5 isn't that bad.
But number 13 is, haha!
I don't know. I find it more than alright. I actually like it a lot. I just like the others more. Oh, and as a quick mention, the entire fight is set to the amazing backing track, The Metal Lotus. It feels straight out of Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, fits the fast-paced tone of the fight really well, and it's a pretty fun listen to on its own. Post analysis is pretty fine. Wiz finally gets his comeuppance after taking non-stop L's this entire episode, and they go into depth and Excalibur's counters to Raiden, and also this funny little black box which they already say out loud in the episode, which actually was just an error, but it's also really funny with how much they just try to say, he has infinite ammo, guys. Yeah, sure he loses, but he definitely has infinite ammo. It makes it sound really funny, so I don't mind it that much.
And generally, just the entire post-analysis is stating out all the facts, like actually calking Atlas's asteroid feat, which they had mentioned previously. Not much to really talk about, but at the same time, perfectly passable, perfectly alright.
Yeah, this episode was an alright time, man. I personally think Wolverine vs. Raiden was the better episode, at least in terms of animation. It just had more moments where action could just sink in, compared to this, which just had constant action in your face 24/7, which some people like, and I'm not gonna fault them for that. But as for a sponsored episode, it's good.
You know, it's only just now sinking in that the sponsored episode is above the finale. That sounds wrong.
Hey guys, want to see an outdated meme?
Isn't that the one part you disliked about the episode? Hey, is your accelerator running?
Go fuck yourself.
Oh, comic book matchups, there you are, here and there, all around, non-stop after the teases showed pretty much most of them being comic book matchups. Yeah, we got like one non-teased matchup prior, but yeah, the comic burnout again. Really kind of got grating here.
More so than it being comic burnout, it's insane to me that they went so many episodes in a row and just went down the list of all the confirmed characters.
3 Marvel characters in the first half. Love it. Just love it.
That too.
There's a reason oversaturation of comic book characters has been both a meme and a critique towards Death Battle, regardless of the episode's quality. You can see that both from the general perspective, the casual audience, and the more mainstream audience, that comic book characters were getting really annoying to see because of how frequently they show up and in the quantity that they do. That being said, though, this episode's pretty alright.
But before we get into the episode itself, let's talk about the points really quick. Because of the fact that we can all rank things so differently from each other, it's possible for some things to get the same score. It happened with Yoda vs. King Mickey and Link vs. Cloud in the last season. This season, we may or may not have ranked this and the next 3 episodes at the same score, but we did come up with a way to rank them logically, to be fair. But I'm just saying, we consider these on a very similar level of quality to each other, for better or worse.
Curse you, season, and your consistency.
Magneto's analysis is probably one of my favorite of the season. Shocking, I know, another comic book character, but this is what I'm actually interested in learning about. And they give me a lot to sink my teeth into. His backstory and the fact that he's not a bad guy anymore, which I genuinely didn't know about. It's just really interesting to learn about him as a character. His power set, they tried to make it sound interesting, but it really isn't for me. And it's not as versus oriented as I would be expecting, considering that this is Magneto. You hear the feats that are given, but not much in the way of numbers. Kind of like Zuko versus Todoroki, but it's not anywhere near as egregious. Pretty solid. I like it a lot.
Oh, look at that. Domi has his own little segment in this episode. That seems to be quite a theme in this season, isn't it?
I did like how they brought up all of the specific things that would ultimately lead to him countering Tetsuo so perfectly later on. But we can get to that when we get to that. Side note, it's funny to me that they went out of their way to mention Hercules in both Magneto vs. Tetsuo and in Thor vs. Vegeta, just to hint towards Hercules coming up in the season, and no one saw it coming anyway.
The most notable thing about Tetsuo's analysis was highlighting the differences between the anime and the manga, because most people like me are more familiar with the anime and how things played out in that. So seeing what actually was going on in the original story was surprising and kind of neat. This doesn't really have any major effect on Tetsuo's analysis as a whole, but it's still nice that they had that difference there. Besides going over Tetsuo's abilities like teleportation and turning into lightning, which is something I did not know he could do, was the whole contention of the Big Bang that Tetsuo created at the end of Akira, which I know was a big factor when coming into this debate for a lot of people. So it was interesting to see them seemingly buy it.
Or at least humor it.
Now, before we go into the fight itself, I think it's kind of interesting to note the voice actors for these two characters. Edward Bosco, who also voiced Magneto in the DBX he was featured in, reprises his role here.
And for Tetsuo, they got the person who did Wally West, Joshua Waters. They both do a pretty good job, I would say. As far as the fight itself, honestly, I really like the general aesthetic of the environment, and Tetsuo's sprites work pretty well for him.
I do agree there. It did really look pleasing based on the sneak peek, but I'll be honest in saying that the lead up to this episode, for me personally, I was not looking forward to it. I mean, with the amount of comic book dubbing in the first half, just really made me feel so unenthusiastic for this matchup. I actually did go out of my way to watch Akira, and I thought it was fine, but Tetsuo himself, I didn't really get anything out of, and it made me question why people even wanted him in versus animations. And after I really thought about it, I really didn't like the match at all at that point. And then the sneak peek, which while it did have a cool aesthetic, I thought was the weakest sneak peek, with a lot of just slow moving moments, which are just the nature of the characters being telekinetic. And there were a lot of weird and jarring shots, like Magneto blocking the crushed car. Some of the sprites for Magneto look really off, like the lower half just looks completely out of place.
The purple diaper.
And also a teeny tiny little big animation project that we were all working on kind of made me just not pay attention to this episode at all, and honestly feel nothing towards it for most of the waiting period up until the episode release. And once I did watch it all the way through, gotta say, really won me over. I'd say past the sneak peek, it really picks up and plays a lot to the character's strengths and feels way more fast-paced and tense.
The storytelling in the animation is also done pretty well, I would say. It actually feels like the characters interacting, which isn't necessarily the highest praise I could give, but I was impressed by how well they bounced off of each other here.
This is also the debut of DJ Tiki in the writer's seat for Death Battle, and you can really feel that because this feels really different from every other comic fight because of the story structure. We haven't had a story-driven episode like this in a long time, so it's really nice to see one play out like this. I guess Jonathan vs. Tanjiro counts, but not to the same extent. There's stuff set up at the beginning and end, but this one has stuff going throughout.
Cool little fact about this fight after rewatching it. Tetsuo is the physical fighter of the two, while Magneto himself never actually throws any hands towards Tetsuo, which kind of shows the difference personality-wise between the two. Tetsuo acting more aggressive and all his impulses, while Magneto is trying to be more clever and creative with his abilities. Also, this shot where Tetsuo just mashes a building with his giant-ass forehead I don't know, that just gets me.
The track for this episode is pretty good in my opinion. I seemingly like different parts than other people do, but either way, it does a really good job, especially near the end, at leading up to the climax. Once Magneto sees Tetsuo as the monster.
Yeah, the entire transformation is really well done, and even manages to fit in the welcome to die really naturally as Tetsuo is in this crazed state, but is also asking Magneto to help him, to stop him from suffering. So then Magneto pulls the iron out of his own blood to make iron sauce to fight back against Tetsuo, which is really raw. But it isn't enough as Tetsuo does his whole Big Bang thing and Magneto is completely swelled up inside. The screen turns to complete white, the music fades, but then the music comes back, not in a triumphant feel, but in a somber one, in a really slow one, as Magneto realizes that Tetsuo is suffering and follows his request. Then Magneto, holding the Big Bang in his own hands, which is even more raw, one-shots the giant Tetsuo monster. But then Tetsuo claws his way out and charges towards Magneto. And then in one last shot, Magneto puts him down, and in somber tears, Tetsuo thanks him. And in a sigh, Magneto accepts his gratitude and fades off. What a powerful ending for a matchup I honestly didn't think would go this route, but it worked wonders for its overall quality and having a very memorable ending.
The post-analysis goes surprisingly in-depth without ever having to bring up numbers. They just say, oh, in terms of stats, Magneto absolutely destroys. See that kid? He's fucking dead. But ability-wise, it's closer, even though it really isn't, but they made an attempt and I respect it. They go really in-depth about Tetsuo's abilities and what they can do, and they even gave him the benefit of the doubt that it really is a Big Bang, even though it really isn't.
Ultimately, they did a really good job of showing how Magneto's abilities allow him to take down Tetsuo even at the peak of what you could imagine his power to be. I appreciate that. I don't know if all the arguments they brought up for Tetsuo really are totally fair, but I don't know if I care either, and I'm fine with that.
And yeah, while the episode was really good overall and I enjoyed it, I will say that it was really unexciting with just yet another comic match at the end of the day, and I was hoping for something more fresh with this. And for the next time, what we saw was, oh my god!
Our story continues exactly where it left off, with hyper fanboying over Goku vs. Superman 3.
It's mythology, guys! No way! A new medium! Something new! Something different! Something big!
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool.
So, with the announcement of this episode, I watched Monkey Kid in hype for this matchup. It is a very good show. Watch it now. I don't need to explain it. Just look at this clip. Watch it. This is not an advertisement. This is a requirement. Hercules vs. Sun Wukong.
Don't you mean Heracles?
As Hyper said, I think it's safe to say that the entire community was basically backhanded by this, because, like, who expected this? Who expected this? Raise your hand. Put it back down now, because you're a fucking liar, and we will not tolerate that. Anyway, with great hype comes great expectations, and people did not really know what to expect for this one.
Was it going to be sprites? Was it going to be 3D animated? Was it going to be hand-drawn even? Like, yeah, people were just left in the dark here. This is something that Death Bell had never done before.
Okay, let's be real though. We all pretty much assumed it would be Spray. Right.
Heracles' rundown was really well made, and I think a lot of that can be attributed to its presentation being more of a history lesson than a traditional versus rundown, which is made even more pleasing because despite being bajillions of years old, I'm not going to fact check exactly how long.
There's an estimation of somewhere between 700 billion.
Heracles' story holds up really well. It just feels really engaging, and there's just so many feats that just scream, what the fuck?
Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
that it keeps me engaged way more than it reasonably should. I should get a hobby. Something I should praise for essentially the whole episode, but I guess it highlights in the rundown here. They really cared about presenting the accuracy in this one. Not versus wise, but more so to the source material. You can tell there was a lot of research put behind the legends themselves. How can you tell? Because it's Mythology Guy approved, and that's the best way to watch this episode.
That's a good thing for a lot of people. Admittedly, on my first few watch-throughs of the episode, though, the sheer quantity of stuff they bring up for the two can almost get overwhelming, if I'm honest. Although, the more I watch it, the less that is an issue, I can say.
The mighty Hercules' power was simply beyond their comprehension, leading them to admit the analyse's immaculate storytelling, going step by step through the hero's trials, detailing how each of his various weapons were obtained in intriguing depth.
Oh yeah, and who could forget the greatest feat of all time, the nipple sprinkler.
Well, it's about to get even weirder, because now we're gonna look at Sun Wukong's analysis.
And wow, that is a strong first impression. It shoots a laser beam out of his eyes. He was born from a rock and he shoots a laser beam.
Goku was inspired by this guy, though he seems more like Superman from the beginning. But besides that, as someone who didn't know much about Sun Wukong's history, besides like all the different versions of him that has come in different media over the years.
Hey, it's me, Goku!
Sun's analysis was informative, kind of like Hercules. Like talking about how he has all these layers of immortality, which comes from him just being afraid of death itself, despite all of his cockiness and brashness. That's a good look into his overall character.
And I do have to say, I don't fully understand how 40 layers of immortality works, but hey.
All these layers of immortality can get pretty crazy. But what is even crazier is all of Sun's abilities, which I didn't know about. Like, I didn't know he could transform himself into anything, or the fact that he could survive almost any injury.
Like that one time, his head just kind of floated back onto his body. Sun Wukong has some fun clips.
Amitabha.
And that kind of brings me into something else. All these clips they use for both characters, they're from different types of media, and some of them are definitely more wacky than others.
This fine food for only a few small coins? They who run this place must be public benefactors.
Before I went into this, I don't think I ever knew that Sun Wukong had like multiple cartoons. Most of them seem Western inspired, which I guess fair enough. Sun Wukong is a really big figure in Chinese mythology, so I guess that's kind of on me. But it's just so cool to see all these different interpretations of him being used in the analysis for him. But besides that, yeah, there's not really much else to go over.
So yeah, the analyses do a really good job of encapsulating who the characters are, what they do, what abilities they have, and impressively, for how dense it is, a lot of that stuff gets included in the fight. And speaking of which...
At last, the battle is reached, and quite the unique battle it is.
So the fight opens up, and the first thing you're going to notice is the presentation of it all, because it all takes place on a singular scroll, which is really artistic. Reminds me a bit of Okami, but, you know, if it was pixels instead of 3D, it's a really good episode of Death Battle instead of a Capcom game that bombed when it shouldn't have. So Heracles asks for an apple, Sun gives him an apple, but not really. It's made of something. I don't know what it is. And then they fight.
Now, the voice actors for this episode. Hercules is voiced by Blythe Mellin.
I am Heracles!
And Sun Wukong is voiced by Alex Mai.
And Alex Mai's performance as Sun Wukong really captures the cockiness and kind of annoying attitude that Sun has in his stories to a T. So kudos to him for that.
You can really hear the nature of these characters as their lines are delivered. As Speedy says, Sun's a lot more carefree and jokey, where Heracles is way more serious and uptight throughout the entire battle, except for that one line. Even if you didn't know these characters somehow, you can really get a feel for what they're like just by watching this battle and hearing the deliveries that they make. I also like how their abilities and arsenal clash.
Despite Wukong's massive amount of abilities, Heracles actually manages to keep up. either countering via his raw strength, a few counters via certain weapons, and using strategy to close the gap between himself and Wukong. It actually makes for a really fun dynamic, and the overall presentation never dips as the scroll keeps unraveling throughout the fight, and Wukong is just having the time of his life, while Heracles just gets more fed up with him, which leads to the funny interaction, which I personally did like.
Personally, I actually feel like the gag takes away a little bit from the tone of everything, because other than that, Heracles is taking the fight very seriously, whereas Wukong is the one making light of everything. But it's not that big of a deal.
So here's a little detail that most of you probably noticed. When Sun and his clone transforms into those two snakes that restrict Hercules' arms, it's a neat little callback to the iconic picture of Hercules strangling those two snakes that tried to kill him.
Alas, for any positive, there may well be a negative hiding behind it.
Minor critique coming up, but this one scene here, where Hercules is getting his ass beat by Sun's three-headed transformation, really doesn't look that good. This sprite is just in one pose the entire time, even when switching directions and even getting knocked up and down, literally. It just looks so stiff, and I wish they just used a different pose every once in a while.
I do really like how the fight clearly portrays Heracles' strongest tool as the Hydra Blood arrows, which reflects the analysis as well. But Wukong actually outsmarts Heracles for once, having it be a clone in his place, before absolutely demolishing Heracles with the full size of his staff.
Phrasing is a powerful tool, easily misused in the wrong hands.
And then we get to the ending bit, which is... What? The build-up to it is really nice, revealing Hanji and symbols to represent them as their weapons are winding back. But once they collide, it's just really messy. You can't really tell what's going on, so the narrator ends up spoiling it for you, when in reality it was already revealed, but you can't really see that. And then Sun Wukong just kind of explains everything, because there's no real way to show, oh, I struck him so hard, he turned into nothingness. Worse is nobody. I'm sorry, I had this week in a Kingdom Hearts show. I'm sorry.
Ultimately, yeah, the God forms were a good idea, but were just not visually concise enough to do their job.
I will say on rewatches, I was able to tell what was going on visually, but yeah, admittedly, when I first saw it, I had no idea what was going on. I just heard, the Monkey King is victorious, and it just, I don't know, felt kind of abrupt. Yeah, and then the way he actually beats him is just hitting him
really, really hard.
Riveting.
And yeah, that's not to mention the smaller nitpick of how the analysis kind of made a point to only measure their normal forms, so their god forms showing up for the climax, for like the deciding blow, is a little bit odd to me as well.
Despite that setback at the end, though, this episode is just a masterpiece when it comes to presentation. I don't think we've had an episode like this, nor are we going to get another one like it for a long time. Probably the next mythology matchup, whenever that happens.
I've been seeing a lot of Zeus versus
Isaac Clarke.
Based.
One last thing is the track, Hero's Journey. It complements the vibe very well and has an overall mystical feel, which adds to the presentation of bringing myths to life. And while it isn't something I would listen to on its own, I still think it's pretty neat. And it even has a very soothing end to it, which was actually originally much longer, but cut down to a more reasonable length for the episode.
With the music acknowledged, our reviewers reach the end of their segment.
Do you guys hear that?
Who is that?
And finally, with the troubling query, the narrator makes his swift and abrupt exit.
Oh no, you fucking don't. I haven't had dinner in weeks. Come back here.
Oh no, get your hands off me! Ah!
Oh, yo, Speed, think fast. Ah! He didn't think fast. So, we're on revealed character number 4, and this time it's Vegeta. I think it's safe to say that the revealed characters were just being more and more uninteresting by this point. We wanted to see some new blood, so I'm pretty sure the absolute lack of a surprise of this matchup's announcement rubbed people the wrong way and gave people a bad impression. The constant appearance of these teased characters left a very unenthusiastic taste in everyone's mouths, and that might have contributed to a really boring and lackluster wait period. And by the time the episode rolled around, it was probably about the same for me as it was for the waiting period. It's kind of really enthusiastic. We're on number 6.
First of all, you got two of us who think the episode is an overrated and confused mess. And then there are two of us that are right.
While the matchup is interesting enough, it is two returning combatants, and I wouldn't necessarily say it's one that I thought needed to happen. Although I know a lot of people had been asking for the episode for a long time.
So first up, we got Vegeta. Oh wait, they put Thor first? That's odd.
MCU hype.
Thor's analysis compared to his other ones goes more over beats rather than his story and character growth, which I know some people might have a problem with, and I can understand that. Right off the gate, you get some really impressive feats already that blows all of his other ones out of the water. I mean, knocking out the Phoenix Force, having an arm wrestling contest with the God of Strength himself that resulted in pulling the Earth out with its gravitational pull. They are really going just all out with this one. So it's nice to see how they really emphasize Thor's strength in this one. Instead of, keeping his top speed at Mach 32. I mean, come on.
Oh, he died. Now I can talk about how I don't like this rundown. Yeah, they prioritize all this power and versus stuff. That's kind of the problem. So we talked about the Yoda rundown last season a good bit because it talks about too much of his story and not about much of the versus stuff. Here we have what's pretty much the exact opposite. Cool, look at all this versus stuff. He got faster again. Praise be unto the gods of versus. But who is this guy? We hear he has a bit of an ego complex. We don't really get told what it's like. You don't get told any of his relationship with any of the other Avengers, which, yeah, that's the thing that they do or don't do in all the other Avengers rundowns, but here it just stands out way more.
For me, it's really awkward, the fact that they speak about the beginning of Thor's story as if it was the ultimate culmination of his character. It doesn't feel like they go very much into anything that happens later on for him, other than the stats. I feel like that is a missed opportunity.
Well, I definitely understand the problems that you guys brought up, especially considering that Thor's previous episode actually went more into his character and, events surrounding him instead of the same old, oh yeah, he had a cocky attitude problem. I do still think that what they do touch upon of Thor's character isn't necessarily overshadowed by everything else they bring up for him when it comes to equipment and strength. But that's just me.
All of that is very much put into perspective for me by Vegeta's analysis, by contrast.
Dragon Ball is many things, but the one thing I would never use to describe it until the season finale is boring. And then I got to Vegeta's analysis, and there's stuff here, it's informative, I like the structure of it, but none of it really clicked with me.
For Vegeta's analysis, they do go over his power much like Thor, but they also balance it out with his arc, starting from his ego-filled young days and eventually molding himself into becoming more than just a fighter, but also a father figure who wants to protect his family. And I really like that. It shows that they actually really care about Vegeta, and people watching can get a grasp and idea of who he is. We've been seeing that a lot this season, and it continues over with Vegeta as well, and yeah, I really like it. I really do like Vegeta, and I like how he was handled here. Nothing really major in downsides. Pretty enjoyable. They did him justice. Well, until they actually killed him, and then his son, and then they had him kill himself and to Kakarot as well in the save scene. Maybe Vegeta wasn't done the best.
Goku doesn't need to match Vegeta's slightly lower power levels, so there's nothing stopping Vegeta from combining the full sum of their parts.
Is that me? Is that me stronger than me? I'll f***ing kill me!
Hey, look, funny shockwave. Ha 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 ha.
In the words of a one-hit wonder rapper from the 70s, stop. Hammer time. So, here we see Thor carrying a tree for whatever reason, probably firewood. And here we see Vegeta doing my favorite activity in the woods, aggressive shitting. And then the two fight.
Okay, real talk, I'm pretty sure that was supposed to be a reference to Thor being the god of trees, which is kind of fun.
First starts off rather quickly. You get to see some energy blast, Thor reflecting them with his hammer.
Thou fightst well for a mortal.
You just started fighting.
He literally hasn't done anything yet.
And then we probably get to a very awkward moment for the entire fight.
So yeah, Thor takes out this weird thing, Yarnbjorn, and we get one of the probably weirdest, slowest melee sequences in the entire fight. The sprite used was clearly not made to accommodate the extra weapon, and it really shows. Everything just feels very sluggish for this portion in particular. Also, there's one part of the fight that was meant to be here in the storyboards, but got cut due to time, that I think would have at least justified Yarnbjorn's inclusion, but instead, Vegeta just catches the axe and evaporates it into nothingness.
And then Vegeta jumps straight into Blue Evolved, and while it might seem like they're rushing through forms, modern Dragon Ball, they just kind of just go straight to their blue forms, so it's honestly just more accurate than anything else. And the fight actually does pick up pretty well. Gets a lot more fast paced, the hits are very meaty, and they do some neat trading of abilities, like Thor absorbing Vegeta's Big Bang attack, and Vegeta trying to grab Thor's hammer, which leads to this funny bit. Now's a good time to mention that the VAs for these two are pretty good. Thor's VA is Jonah Scott, returning from his previous DB, and I'd say he does a better job here for Thor. Really gets across more of his character with the specific accent and the way he talks. Just feels more akin to Thor here, and I liked it a lot.
Personally, I actually see that as a detriment. I understand that a lot of Thor's comics have that verbose nature to them, but that's frankly one of the most annoying things about Thor, and I feel like it shouldn't be emphasized when you put him onto the screen. While his actual performance was good, I don't like the verbiage they gave Thor for most of his lines here.
And then there's Vegeta, voiced by Lanny, who did him all the way back in Season 1, and regularly does Vegeta in the Team 4-Star Bridge series. And he is one of, if not the greatest VA this season, bar none. He sells pretty much all of his lines with the actual energy of Vegeta, with so much energy and vigor behind every delivery, and not to mention his screaming performances, which actually remind me of his Xenoverse playthrough.
Do it! Do it now! Do it!
Man, they really strapped him and forced him to play that Xenoverse mission. That's really cool, but you gotta respect the dedication.
And yeah, you get the fun moment where Vegeta tries to catch the hammer, but it doesn't work like that, which ultimately leads into Vegeta going Ultra Ego. And Ultra Ego definitely makes a strong first impression, completely shrugging off all of Thor's attacks, which, I'm not gonna lie, was the coolest part of the fight. One of the coolest parts of the fight.
Vegeta gives a pretty good line right after Ultra Ego gets activated.
Tell me, does a god such as yourself feel fear?
In terms of fight dynamic, it seems to skew Vegeta way more than Thor, on account of the fact that he just kind of beats his ass for so long until Thor transforms. It's practically the Vegeta show.
But once Thor does transform, you get another cool moment.
No fear, only
Then you get a sequence of rapid mid-air collisions that is just a given when it comes to something like a Dragon Ball matchup most of the time. It looks really cool and really sells the power of both of them and how they have now gotten back to being equals. But after Thor wins that encounter, we transition into the final stage of the fight.
So we're at the final stretch here, and now it's time for the generic beam struggle that every DBC fight tends to have. Thor is charging up his Gallblast, Vegeta's charging up his Final Flash. Vegeta then uses two of his Brain Cells and actually uses Instant Transmission to teleport right behind Thor and catch him up by surprise.
Although on that note, just for a quick aside, that God Blast did not leave a scratch on the mountain. Real powerful there, guys.
With the music coming to a silence, it seems like Vegeta has won. Oh wait!
There's more!
And then we get the absolute standout shot, the complete raw imagery of Thor just grappling onto Vegeta. The hand-drawn shot and swelling music just sells the impact so much.
The shot of Thor just grabbing Vegeta out of the smoke, man, it just hits. Every time. And also, the track. The track for this episode is one of the better ones, personally. Although, admittedly, the music in the season in general was very good.
What the fuck do you mean good? This is just straight up fire. The whole Viking rock aesthetic, which is brought together by the vocal delivery of Brandon Yates, makes this track stand out and go so hard. Speaking of this track, though, to my knowledge, this is the only time the vocal version of a track was used in the post-analysis rather than its instrumental counterpart. Yes, I'm that much of a nerd. What are you going to do about it?
Now, ain't that a fun fact?
Anyways, Vegeta lets out a cry of agony as he sees the future premonitions of his fate throughout the rest of the season, giving out everything he's got for one last frontal assault, while Thor makes an admittedly pretty forced MCU reference.
Always aim for
which is immediately forgiven once Thor summons his hammer, tosses Vegeta straight towards it, and smashes him completely. It's really over the top and really cool.
While the fight was ultimately pretty good and satisfying, there were still nitpicks I have. There's several shots where Mjolnir is on his hip when it definitely shouldn't be.
Also, another side note, Final Flash, I don't think that half of it is supposed to be colored black, but I don't know enough about Dragon Ball to say that. But yeah, all those glitches aside, overall it was very well animated, I would say. Visually striking.
Now, something they do mention in the post-analysis is that they didn't use Odin Force Thor. Kind of surprising, but...
Yeah, isn't that fun, DB audience? They nerfed Thor, and you still lost.
Also, kudos for them to basically say that Galactus one-shots the DBC universe.
But no, in all honesty, the post-analysis really does just put into perspective that Thor himself is just so far above Vegeta realistically. They still portrayed the fight pretty well, I believe, but the post-analysis really does make you wonder, was it worth the debate?
And also, if Thor was that much stronger, then why did he get bodied so much during the entire fight?
Ultimately, good animation. It's almost as smooth as Vegeta's animation in his Season 2 episode. Oh, you don't remember his Season 2 episode? Oh, that's on you.
So, Thor vs. Vegeta, an episode that, while the matchup itself wasn't that interesting, the episode greatly delivered on everything it had to offer. While some was like it more than others, I think we can all agree that this was a good send-off for both characters. Man, even though I really like this episode, I think the thing that bothers me most is the Thor sprite. Why couldn't they just make him more buff to the point where his muscles almost reaches his chin, have him completely nude from the waist up, and have a long bushy beard that makes him look like a bear?
Yo, Hyper, what do you got there?
I don't know.
Wow, Sauron versus Lich King. In all honesty, I'm not surprised they got another Marvel character, especially the one that wants to turn everyone into dinosaurs. Honestly, most people would be against the comic oversaturation, but I think here it's a notable exception.
Oh, Gumball?
That's not the right Sauron, is it?
All joking aside, it's funny how people just didn't really know much about Lord of the Rings as a whole. They know all these other animes that are like super obscure to the general public, but one of the most renowned literature pieces of all time? Nah, that's too obscure.
I can't wait for my extremely fascinating and crazy reasons as to why I ranked such a high-praised episode. I just forget it happened. Much like Lord of the Rings itself, so hey, it's just accurate.
Have you watched Lord of the Rings?
No, I haven't.
I have.
Well, how'd you like it?
I saw it.
So, funny enough, we don't really know much about either character. I know some stuff about Sauron, but yeah, I'm not well-versed to him, so I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite for calling out people that don't really know either franchises.
I legit didn't even know who Lich King was until people were guessing who Sauron's opponent was. I actually just have nothing to say on either of them. They have so little impact to me.
Regardless, the analysis for both of these characters are what you would expect. A good amount of interesting lore dump here and there. Sauron's backstory is, of course, something that was greatly expanded upon in other media, but Deathbell does a really good way of explaining it to the viewers and giving them all the nitty-gritty info that you need to know. Sauron's rundown also has a little cut of a guy with Wiz and Boomstick, where instead of Boomstick just messing around with one of the opponent's weapons, here he just fucking eats it.
And you can see Wiz's just sheer surprise. Apparently it was tasty. I don't get it, but you know, you do you, Boomstick. You do you.
You know, speaking of which, I actually do own one of those rings in IRL. I wonder what it tastes like.
No. Put it down. No. As far as Lich King's side of the analyses is concerned, we spend a good portion of the beginning of it just leading up to what we will eventually see to be the Lich King. It's really funny to me, though, that the Arthas that we are going to have in the fight didn't even show up until the end of his analysis preview when they were coming out. Either way, the one thing I can criticize with these analyses is it did just kind of feel like a lot of lore that very easily will go over a lot of people's heads, I think.
I guess that's mostly because that we don't really know much about either franchises that well, so...
Even for series I don't even know well, I felt like I could get into analyses, but for these, I just don't remember a single thing. Like, I don't even remember any of the characters' names that were mentioned outside the main combatant ones, outside of, like, just, like, one or two characters from Lord of the Rings that I just know based on the movies. And, I don't know, I just got, like, nothing out of it. And I don't remember particularly anything memorable to it. Like, it wasn't really bad or good. It just left me with no impact, and I felt like I didn't gain anything more for these two than I already had.
That sounds like someone not knowing much about literature. Oh!
The visual novel fan can't read. Anyway, let's open up the next page to the fight.
This fight just leads very strong. You get an immediate sense of the atmosphere the fight is going for. It might be a bit of a shame for some people not having an army fight, although we were never gonna get that, let's be real. But even just the two kings one-on-one is enough for me.
Also, high upgraded animation. Where was this for Boba Fett vs. Predator?
This animation has so much attention to detail in the smallest of areas, but we'll talk about that as we go through the fight.
Let's just quickly move on to the voice actors. Sauron is voiced by Ryan Solis, and Lich King is voiced by Philip Sacramento. They do a pretty nice job portraying the characters, which I also want to go a bit more into when we get to it.
But for now, we're going to focus on how all good things start, with a home invasion. Of course, Lich King isn't going to let his throne be taken by some wannabe guy who looks like he came from the gates of oblivion, so they're going to throw down.
Stop! You violated the law!
Pay the fine or serve your sentence. Then pay with your blood.
Once the fight starts, it shows really nice cinematography, although it does show one of my gripes with it, that being, they are very slow. And I don't mean that they are heavy suits of armor moving around with a lot of power and force behind everything. They just kind of feel floaty. It feels like every single strike they go for lacks impact. At least for this exchange.
And that is every outright negative in the fight animation. We're only at number 5.
I think the magic effects, fire, ice, everything around, is really well done. I think the VFX team did a great job here.
You can really see the highlights when they're throwing shit at each other, when Sauron turns into a wolf, or when they just stare at each other really aggressively.
Now, something I don't see many people talk about for this episode is the voice acting. This is probably one of the best exchanges throughout any Death Battle this season. When Sauron grabs Lich King and says that he's gonna tear out his sword, and Lich King responds with, "You'll find nothing there." The way he just delivers it, and the way it just hits right. Another example is during the climax, when Sauron is projecting Lich King's death onto him, and Lich King responds that he talks nothing but lies. Another epic moment to the caviar of voice acting for this episode.
Also, we cannot ignore just how much work was clearly put into the effects, and especially our main protagonist, Big Volcano.
Big Volcano Sweep!
But one of the best highlight moments for me and a lot of people is when Lich King uses the Eye of Akris and Sauron uses his true form, and they just have a giant staring contest. It looks silly, yeah, but it just works in such an epic proportion that all the silliness of it just kind of fades away.
And just going back a little bit, it was also cool to see Lich King's plague be completely just counteracted by Sauron going into his true form to begin with. And as soon as Sauron turned into the eye, one detail you might not have noticed is that all of the snow that used to be in the area turns into rain.
It's little details like that that makes the episode.
And once they finish their staring contest, Sauron lunges forward and shatters Lich King's sword in one blow.
Followed by the goat himself.
Oh, and one more thing.
After Frostmore gets shattered, we get what is probably one of the best kills of the season, despite there being no gore. If there was a way I could describe this death, it would probably be the exact opposite of Deku's, which is funny because that episode comes right after this one. What it lacks in blood and guts, it more than makes up for presentation and just the entire feel of it all. On the surface, it may not look like much, but in context, it's absolutely devastating because his soul is getting sucked into the ring, pretty painfully considering he's surrounded by what I can only assume are the 9 circles of hell itself. He falls with a katunk, and then Sauron just sits there, and what probably won't be a throne in about half an hour because you got rid of all the ice in the area, you fuckwad.
Although, let's not mince words, that is an epic final shot.
A very temporary one, but yeah.
Yeah, that's basically this episode. They give both of them very similar stats via island raising, although the black boxes give Sauron a much higher potential than Lich King.
This is the top of the season for so many people, and it's not hard to see why. You see all the attention to detail, just a really good animation in general, and learning about characters that not many people knew about, somehow.
And I don't really disagree with people placing it that high. Like, if they know the characters way more than we do, then, like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. For me personally, I just did not care throughout the entire thing. Like, I'll be honest, I probably had the least to say about this episode than any other episode this season. And yes, I am including Wanda versus Satana. I just couldn't get into it compared to others. Like, I'm not really sure even myself as to why I didn't. Like, I have such a hard time remembering anything from this episode off the top of my head whenever I'm asked about it. Like, the only things that really stuck with me were the parts where it turned into rain and the one eyeball scene with the Columbo jump scare. I just didn't really get anything out of it, and it's probably one I'm not gonna really remember much at all. And for those who did enjoy it more than me, that's cool. I'm glad people got the episode they wanted for the characters that they really liked. But for me, I just don't really have anything to say on it, and I'm probably not going to look back on it all that much.
Yeah, Hyper. Go back to your visual novels.
Okay.
I will say, the main draw for me, despite not knowing these characters, is just the high fantasy feel of it. It felt really satisfying to see a high fantasy fight in the series. And look at that, we are getting another one not too long from now.
You see, now would be a really good time to insert a Fuswada meme, but we here have higher standards.
Actually, I think there was already a hit on him last I checked.
I wonder what that could be about.
I wouldn't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about.
Fuck you, Hyper, you dickhead!
Patience is waning. Is this entertaining? My patience is waning. Is this entertaining? I got this feeling, yeah, you know. Feel the threat, cause every step is like a mountain moving. We are the mountain, I forget the line you're introducing. You feel the hurt, cause every step I take the earth is
Hey guys, look! It's the matchup nobody wanted! Yeah, like seriously. So yeah, I really like this episode.
And I am quite disappointed by it.
And I'm Gumball Viking.
Don't worry, you guys can be wrong.
Who is this guy? He isn't me. Maybe I've gone too far out of my reality.
So this episode kind of blindsided people. Not that no one was expecting it to happen, but it really just came out of nowhere. A lot of people were looking forward to Omni-Man vs. Bardock instead. I laugh at those people. But in all seriousness, this was a fun idea for me. It's not necessarily a fair fight, and everyone knew that, including the companies who make the shows.
So you see, with most waiting periods, there's a lot of who would win for the episode, whether that would be for the general versus community, or for the casual audience, or sometimes both. For this one time, almost unanimously, no one, and I repeat, no one, legitimately thought Homelander had any chance of winning, and thus spun an era for Homelander, to which I would like to call the anti-Goku, to which there's always the meme, can he beat Goku? For Homelander, it is, can they beat Homelander? And the answer, 100% of the time, is yes! So yeah, that was a very amusing wait time. Oh, and absolutely no disrespect to Homelander, it is just kind of just one side against him. But it was also interesting for me as I had just finished Invincible right before the episode was revealed, and I was really interested to see what they were going to do with the episode.
And on the opposite end, I got into The Boys because of this episode.
And I'm Red Runner.
Look what you did, Hyper. Look what you did.
Omni-Man's analysis is pretty nice. I like how it tells the story of his character so far, going from the villainous alien who wants to kill everyone because tradition, I guess, you know, gotta respect the grind.
Enslave everyone.
Not now, me. I can't have the process of me correcting myself like this.
But I'm not...
Anyway, to be more human by the end. In terms of feats, I don't think they really try to sugarcoat it. Homelander's kind of fucked. And it's kind of the fun part of it all. Usually when it comes to an analysis, my favorite thing to point out is usually the writing of it, or maybe one of the feats just catches your eye, or maybe the cutaway gag is better than bad this time. But here... this is the state of Texas with two guns riding down and causing a giant explosion. This is the most Rooster Teeth thing I have ever seen, and I kind of love it.
It's kind of peak.
Yeah, that's about all I got to say. I really hope no one comes in last second to give some negative criticism towards this rundown in particular. Oh, hi, Speedy.
This analysis has probably one of my biggest issues with the episode itself. Why do they limit it to only the first season of Invincible? Yeah, I get that the show is popular and that it's ongoing, but because of that, they lose so much stuff for Omni-Man that they can talk about. So much of his character and so much of his more impressive feats. Like, granted, I'm not expecting to fit absolutely everything in there. I know that's not feasibly possible.
Well, I kind of just started Invincible, so for me personally, I really did appreciate that, so I didn't get spoiled, and I could somewhat understand that to an extent, but at the very least, they do hint towards his character development near the end, as they close it off, and I do think that's good enough for what they could do with just Season 1.
Although, yeah, they do include some stuff from later on in the series, in a way that isn't explicitly spoilery, but it is spoilery if you know what you're looking at. Which kind of just strikes me as odd. They go through all this effort to avoid spoilers, but then use the one panel that can spoil one of the biggest story moments. Not even going to explicitly tell you what frame that is, for the sake of the viewer. But they did it.
You see, yeah, I would agree with that, but man, wouldn't it be funny if they spoiled a certain other series super casually, like in the previous season? Oh wait. But because of this, a lot of segments for Omni-Man specifically, I like how they talk about how Mark would find a way to outsmart his opponents rather than using brute force compared to like Omni-Man, when that's something that's a nice highlight, all things considered, but at the end it doesn't really amount to anything. We already know this from Omni-Man's analysis, that he was raised on the planet, but he was trained as a warrior. It's stuff like this that just kind of makes everything feel limited. Because, yeah, most of the important stuff that has been mentioned was only from the first season of Invincible, or at least the first few issues of Invincible. It makes Omni-Man feel more like an evil Superman clone, which is something that he's far from. It's not something I'm gonna lose sleep over or just outright make me hate the episode, because despite those flaws, the analysis is pretty alright for all things considered.
And on the note of excluding the comic stuff, what was a detriment for Omni-Man? Most people would say it was a positive for Homelander.
Yeah, here they mostly relegate him to the first two seasons of the Amazon show and some of the comic book stuff.
Including the worst cutaway gag in all of Modern Death Battle. Not only just for, the crazily obvious what the but also the complete lack of practicality to it. He's not doing this in the middle of the fight. You cannot convince me he will.
But still, the same problem for Omni-Man, where he gets relegated to only a certain amount of media, I would argue is even more flawed here for Homelander. Because they use the comics, and the comics are so different from the Amazon show that there's no risk of spoiling people about it. Because, well, one, most people don't even like the comics. Two, the comics have long been finished. And three, the Amazon show differs so heavily from the actual source material that you could go all out, which they didn't. Yeah, say what you will about the sperm scene, but that's just kind of how the boys comic rolls. Disturbing shit like that is just kind of how the show and the comics roll in.
And I would say that's one of the reasons it's a good thing they avoided it as much as possible.
Okay, I will actually give some props to FBL because they do actually mention how Homelander is unironically a better dad bad than Omni-Man ever was. So yeah, he has some humanity to him, which kind of makes you a bit sympathetic towards him.
Well, you guys can handle this. I'm gonna go to my house where it's Christmas, even though we're recording in the middle of March. So I'll be right back.
Wait, Gumball, that's my house. That's my house. What are you doing? Gumball.
Yeah, I know it's my house. Thanks for checking on me. You know, self-care is important. Oh, that's a skeleton.
And we now start off with the best fucking preview in the entire show.
The atmosphere of this episode is just great. It's kind of weird that it's set on Christmas for no reason in particular, but this feels just so insidious as you see these two interact. And then it just pans over to Debbie's dead body.
The reveal of it is crafted masterfully, and I remember my jaw dropping when I first saw that, and a lot of other people too. It was a really bold move on their part, and I'd say it paid off really well. And it's all elevated thanks to the impeccable voice acting.
So yeah, Homelander is voiced by famous JoJo actor Young Ye, returning from The Boys Battle Royale, while Omni-Man is voiced by Tom Schulich. Wait, didn't he voice someone else in this season?
Now it's time to bring it around down.
Oh god.
Real talk, I'm impressed by how versatile Tom Schulich as an actor is. And I gotta say, I love how this entire scene opened people up to think they were so creative by making the same John Wick joke across the entire reaction sphere. None of us were original, guys. You gotta accept it.
Listen to me, you really don't have to keep beating me up like that.
Homelander proceeds to then tell Omni-Man to get the fuck out of his country.
Not a great plan.
2 other people said that same thing, and guess where they are? They're fucking dead.
You know what's funny? Because technically both of them happened later, but we don't care about chronology here.
And then Omni-Man declares that he'll feed Homelander his own art. Aw, what a nice guy. Such a great Christmas present. Oh, and yeah, really need to emphasize the delivery for all these lines are flawless, and they just ooze intimidation on both of these sides.
Homelander doesn't really take that seriously until he gets punched in the face. And that wall is very sturdy, huh?
You're probably wondering why I've been silent, you know, up until that last line about this fight. Anything I could say, people have already said, except for one thing.
I want to see dismemberment! Oh, I'd like to see that as well!
My main quote-unquote problem with this animation is that it's not nearly gory enough in terms of the environmental aspect, where these two are known for just kind of killing literally everyone in their path indiscriminately, yet you only really see one handful of people die, and it's through a disintegration death. So does that even really count?
Technically, you also see a bunch of people die off-screen in a plane crash, because there's no way they made it out of that.
How can you see people die if it's off-screen, me? Fucking hell.
Yeah, I do agree with Gumball here.
You mean Red.
And there's another aspect that I kind of have a problem with when it comes to the fight itself. And that is the fact Homelander really gets any hits. Like, he gets smacked around like a sack of potatoes. Yeah, I get that it's accurate to analysis, but could you at least not have him like put up more of a fight? Like, he seems so pathetic in comparison. When you're making a Death Battle episode and you're having a character that clearly outstats the other one, you kind of have to be a bit liberal about the animation. Like, take for example Quicksilver versus Flash. The animation wouldn't have been interesting if Flash literally just speed blitzed the entire time, because that would be more realistic to the research itself. I think a better idea for this episode in general could have been maybe have Homelander get progressively more and more desperate. A cool little segment I thought of maybe could be like Homelander getting that desperate that he would use a civilian to try to get Omni-Man to back off, but Omni-Man would just crush that civilian with his bare hands, surprising Homelander even more.
For that one, I see it as a double-edged sword almost, where I think that would be a really cool interaction, but that doesn't really help Homelander in seeming pathetic. If anything, that compounds it.
That might be true. At least that could have made the fight longer. Or you could have Omni-Man be more visibly impaired by the supersonic scream that Homelander gave him.
By the way, now is as good a time as any to mention that the actual animation assets and all that, really good for this episode. And after the supersonic scream, they dive bomb into the earth, incinerate a few people, and we must have just gotten to the halfway point, right?
Wrong!
Not quite, but it does lead into Homelander's breakdown. Seeing his facade finally shattered and actually being exposed for what he really is, he starts losing it, not being able to comprehend the situation, and Omni-Man just tells him to go. Homelander in a complete rage pushes Omni-Man back, and it leads into Homelander's speech of how he's gonna kill everyone he knows, including his son. And this right here is my particular favorite moment, and one that encapsulates why I like this episode so much. It has just so much character moments in it. It really feels more like a general crossover sort of feel than just in actual episodes of two bricks fighting. And that's something a lot of Season 9 does, and in here, I think it's where it peaks. Just both of their mannerisms and character traits nailed down so well, and how they respond to every single action, whether they say it completely bluntly or just talking down to each other. And I really got into it. And here's where it peaks, because this time, Omni-Man isn't taking any of that, because as soon as his son got involved, he immediately stops holding himself back and just rips off his entire jaw. Jesus. And in an absolute menacing pose of his eyes just completely blacked out, rips out his entire heart and fulfills the promise he made earlier on, and promptly feeds him his entire heart and crushes him as he cries, and with an absolute, and I know I've been saying this word a lot, raw line. Now swallow. Oh, what a nice guy.
God, I wish that was me.
And since we haven't mentioned it up until this point, this fight track is absolutely amazing. It fits the fight really well. It is very reminiscent of Tom Tom from the Omni-Man slaughtering the alien scene, and the lyrics are pretty cool too.
Feel the threat, 'cause every step is like a mountain moving.
And if you actually read the lyrics, it's more or less just kind of describes how Omni-Man is just on a whole nother level to Homelander, which I feel like is going a little too far, but also really funny. And the ending bit in particular is incredibly catchy and has such a menacing aura that I absolutely dug when I first listened to it.
Too bad not all of the song actually makes it into the episode, but that's whatever.
But seriously though, Diabolical Invincible Me, despite the stupid name, is probably one of my favorite tracks of the season. All the way up there.
I find the name kind of fun.
Man, I got shit takes.
And yeah, once you get to the post-analysis, they do not sugarcoat anything. They are very upfront about how lopsided this matchup was. I very much appreciate that, because they do it in a way that is still respectful to Homelander and all that. They just are very blunt about the fact that he was a small fish in a large pond. He had no shot at going up against someone as absolutely brutal and powerful as Omni-Man.
And admittedly, I do see a lot of people saying that they have issue with that being portrayed as a stomp, and yeah, that is fair. For the general consensus of the community, it's very 50-50. You either really like it or you really don't. And I can understand how people wouldn't be a fan of its approach. But I have a few things to say in regards to certain criticism towards the episode. And, well, I won't delve into it, but criticisms such as the ending isn't gory enough and nothing like Invincible, or both of them are some of the most out-of-character portrayals in the entire series, just feels so disingenuous to me, and it feels like it all just stems from just people's dislike of the matchup and just completely ignoring everything that's in it. Again, if you just generally don't like it, that's perfectly fine. I just get really irritated when people say that. But for me personally, this is my favorite of the season. I really enjoyed it. I like how much character it brought. I really enjoy the interactions. The VAs were some of the best in the entire series, and the track is one of the most catchiest ones to me in the entire series. I really enjoyed it overall, and it's going to be one I remember for quite some time.
I know I've been a bit negative during this review, but I still like it a bit. The stuff it does right, it does really right. The interactions being some of the best they've ever done in the series, and the track being so freaking good alone makes this episode go up a good amount of places for me. So yeah, I like it. And just to say again, the track was a banger.
And the name was pretty cool too.
Alright, I have finally discovered who I am, because I think that name is shit. So in the end, we all learned a lot of something today.
I'm glad you got something out of this.
Yeah, shut the fuck up.
I told you. It's no. Yes.
May the best hero win.
Hey, remember back in season 6 when they did Aquaman versus Namor? And they made a slight joke that Aquaman is pretty much like SpongeBob? Yeah, let's just get back to that.
Yeah, no, this was far and away the most unexpected matchup this season, and I don't think anyone's gonna disagree with that.
It's fucking SpongeBob. You know, I would have had a funny follow-up, but part of me just has a really hard time. They just kind of added SpongeBob like it was no big deal. No build-up or anything.
But let's get one thing clear. This isn't normal Aquaman. This is Super Friends Aquaman. You know the really lame one? Yeah, that one.
And in this episode, they were on a mission to prove to people that he is stronger than people think.
They failed miserably.
At least in certain areas.
This is the funniest joke in the entire season. No, not even like anything in the episode. Just seeing the next time of SpongeBob versus Super Friends Aquaman. No! No! What? What? The show never fails to amaze me.
So, did this episode sink or swim? Did it triumph or did it boom womp?
Well, given where we are in the list, you have a good idea. Although none of us necessarily have this in our top spots, we consistently agree that it was pretty good. Which is more than I can say for some episodes.
People are going to have gripes about it, but this is the only SpongeBob matchup that accommodates for the fact that he's underwater, which I feel like would be pretty major.
I personally feel like this might have been the best option for SpongeBob, even if people do have their preferred for his matchup.
So the SpongeBob analysis opens up the exact way you would expect it to. World War II. Because, yeah, let's use a fan theory to introduce the character. Why not? This is already a joke episode. We got nothing to lose here.
Basically, the structure of it follows that Wiz kind of just underestimates SpongeBob because he's seen as very pathetic and weak. But then, as they dive in, they find out that he's a lot more stronger than one might assume, which I find really amusing. And also just the novelty of them talking about SpongeBob SquarePants in a versus setting. It's just really bizarre. Oh, and also, this is such a weird thing, but this episode might have the best black boxes in an episode ever.
SpongeBob canonically shits himself every time he gets hit. That's funny.
This episode went really hard on the comedy. While for me personally, I can't appreciate that sort of stuff much on re-watching. You can even check my reaction. The first viewing was a lot of fun.
Just the sheer extent of SpongeBob's power, abilities, and hacks, all of which I researched firsthand when I was working on the G1 blog for this episode. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. And it's even more so when they decide to delve into the comics and video games for no other reason than they can. Even though when they introduced the episode, they say they're prioritizing the cartoons, that's a bold-faced lie.
I understand that for some people, it might be weird to hear SpongeBob getting this high. I understand if you're not fond of that, but as people who've been around the versus scene for a while, we're kind of just used to it.
Don't get us wrong, it's still painful. We just live with the pain.
And not that typical of Deathball nowadays. Wiz actually gets most of the focus during the analysis because he's just having a mental breakdown throughout, which is very odd, but also kind of refreshing to see from him. You would think after doing so many insane characters over the years that SpongeBob would be nothing new to him, but no, there's a yellow sponge that sucks every bit of sanity he has left. And that's funny.
The tone of it honestly reminds me a good bit of Excalibur vs. Raiden, the reasons I liked that. So I can say I definitely like the character performances from Wiz here.
So let's go to Super Friends Aquaman, because he is quite different.
Yeah, no, it's basically the exact opposite.
For SpongeBob's analysis, the main gimmick was that they were so impressed by so many good strength feats for such a little sponge. Here, they were just desperately trying to find anything, just something for Super Friends Aquaman, because he's not that impressive compared to Bob himself. I mean, what? He can swim at Mach speeds, he has a laser gun, he can talk to fish.
A heat gun, get your facts right.
And his best feat, pushing garbage. I know they had a tab where they put him much higher than that, but just ignore that. I don't know, just on the first viewing, this was just extremely hilarious to me. Just them being so desperate to find anything for this guy. It did honestly give me vibes of Hercule versus Dan with just how utterly pathetic the companion is and just trying to find anything that they can do. And yeah, no, it was really good.
Although, you might start to notice something, even towards the later end of the analysis, once they start getting really good feats for him, honestly. They still treat him like a complete joke, even understanding the fact that he's stronger than a good majority of the various versions of Aquaman that exist.
Yeah, you see, okay, I'm by no means any Super Friends Aquaman stan, and I really couldn't care much about him. But the fact that they brought in one of the lamest versions of Aquaman known to the public, and trying to justify that he isn't that lame in comparison, and then immediately just shitting on him through the analysis, kind of gives the wrong message. Especially considering that in Aquaman vs. Namor, they made a big point about how Aquaman isn't lame as people make him out to be. So it just kind of seems counterintuitive. Again, I don't really care about Super Friends Aquaman, but it kind of shows when you composite one character and just relegate one character to his lamest version. It just kind of seems mixed when it comes to sending messages.
Also, quick side note, how exactly does he go to college if he can't stay out of the water?
You see, to an extent, I would understand that in the context of like any other character, but in this specific context, when he's widely known for being lame, it just feels kind of just a non-issue to me because, like, yeah, no, take Super Friends Aquaman extremely seriously, and I don't know, it just feels like it would not even be anywhere close as to entertaining as it was in the actual episode, and I could somewhat at least get that they do at least prove good feats for him, but then they don't put it in a normal context, but just treat it as more of a joke. The joke's more funnier. I'm gonna be honest. That's way more entertaining to me than if they just took it normally. Yeah, like flat out, that is one of the funniest post-analysis to me with the direction they took. And I have to say personally, that's way more funnier to me, and I don't really mind that at all, especially since it's just for Super Friends Aquaman. So yeah.
And yeah, just to be clear, it's the fact that it feels contradictory to their own goals and points, where on one end of the scale they're trying to prove that Super Friends Aquaman has good feats, but on the other end they're just not really acknowledging them.
Well, fuck you guys. I just think it's funny.
Speaking of which, I love seeing Wiz just driven to the point of swearing with how insane he goes in this episode.
And also just saying flat out that there's only one possibility for the outcome of this episode. That was one of the best, an absolute highlight.
Now imagine if Aquaman won.
Now that would have been the funniest part of the episode.
Now that'd mess with the space-time continuum. Someone would get arrested over that.
Fight opens up with the robot models from the Game Boy Advance version of Battle for Bikini Bottom. Really nostalgic for me. This doesn't mean jack shit to these other people. Anyway, they blow up immediately. SpongeBob picks up the spatula, and we hear Tom Shulk's voice, which is divisive.
It leaves a poor first impression, I think. But no, he has some good range. Once you start hearing more of him as SpongeBob, it settles in.
This guy went from Dio to Omni-Man to SpongeBob.
Take it easy!
To rule the world!
You forgot Kool-Aid Man.
Keston Howard also does a good job as Super Friends Aquaman here. Although I will admit, he does not steal the show quite as much as SpongeBob.
I mean, if they got Solid J to do Aquaman, then that would be different. Aquaman comes through a portal, and guess what? Those portals aren't related to Rick and Morty, contrary to what people thought. And I guess Aquaman shrank in size because it's just slightly taller than SpongeBob now, even though he should be standing, like, well above him.
And yeah, this is a fight that starts up with a misunderstanding, as you usually get with hero versus hero fights.
To be fair, calling SpongeBob a hero is a bit of a stretch because he's caused far worse disasters on accident. So I don't think he was entirely in the wrong to make that accusation.
Speaking of which, SpongeBob's sprite in this episode, pretty good. Like, very well crafted, very expressive. It reminds me a lot of Pose, actually, from last season. So, the animation here paints pretty much an accurate picture, although Aquaman gets a surprisingly good hit right at the start. For the rest of the fight, though, SpongeBob is just completely wiping the floor with him. He tries to mind control SpongeBob at one point, but he just says, nah.
The fact that a literal bubble knocks the wind out of Aquaman should tell you just how pathetic they really wanted to make him.
Those bubbles are powerful, dude.
At least Aquaman's able to get the upper hand again by vaporizing SpongeBob, even if it only takes 3 seconds for him to come back, and then we get the amazing Great Neptune shot, which I'm pretty sure is Keston Howard's face over that hand-drawn frame.
Probably.
Speaking of hilarious, this entire fight just puts all his cards on the table in the humor aspect. And I can say for a fact, it absolutely soars in that regard. As long as you're a SpongeBob fan, because apparently Nemesis wasn't. I had no idea there were people out there who's never seen SpongeBob. I never considered that possibility.
Also, we have the running joke here where SpongeBob repeatedly and consistently misremembers Aquaman's name.
Oh, and look at that. Different portals that shows different versions of Aquaman. Apparently seeing all these superior versions makes Superfans of Aquaman go into depression.
When Aquaman is at his most powerless, you get a genuinely kind of emotional moment where SpongeBob empathizes with him. He encourages him, which actually inspires Aquaman to keep fighting. It's kind of a sweet moment. Although, you can take it in the complete opposite way, because Aquaman just grabs a trident and stabs SpongeBob while he's still talking. Still a cute moment, though.
You know, for focusing on something that only really appeared in one episode, or I guess two now, Modern SpongeBob just decided to do that. It's really creative what they're able to do with the pencil in such short time. Having the little doodle bobs coming out of nowhere, erasing his arm even. It's really nice stuff. And then, oh, he just impaled him. I know that doesn't amount to anything, but that looks kind of painful.
Have you seen actual SpongeBob?
Grip on the thing. Now don't move it till I say.
Anyways, Aquaman sends him through the door. We get the narrator voice by Liam. What the hell? How does he have such good range? And then SpongeBob just vibes in space until he launches himself across the universe at absurdly high speeds. And Aquaman, who they have done nothing but portray him as one of the weakest characters they have ever used, does the second highest scale feat in the entire season by lifting all the water on planet Earth and hurls it at SpongeBob.
And yes, I would say that's probably higher than the moon stuff.
Only being out by the literal omniversal characters they placed who casually destroy universes. So yes, Aquaman had higher scale than Thor, Black Adam, Apocalypse, Trunks, Silver, Sauron, Lich King, Gogeta, Vegito, and everybody else. Which in my opinion, just adds to the hilarity even more. Also, another Columbo jump scare.
Then we get a collision that just uses the explosion from the episode Dying for Pi, which is, according to most experts, the funniest explosion ever used in media. But after all the jokes were told, we get to the ending, which probably is a joke in itself. But the funny thing is, it's way more emotional and invested in the ending than Jonathan versus Tanjiro, which I'm pretty sure went for the same thing, but they somehow did it better.
And it is kind of helped by the music. This track was kind of atmospheric. It changes depending on what's going on in the fight. Kind of reminiscent of Goodbye Chimichanga, but done a lot better overall.
In my opinion, I think it leans a bit much into the SpongeBob aspects of things, but I still really like it.
The way SpongeBob just kind of gives little sniffles rather than just bursting out into tears immediately makes this way more emotionally investing. And the way that Aquaman goes out just asking to be super friends. They even went the extra mile to have SpongeBob make a group for him at the end.
And he still messed up the name, but in this one's case, it honestly made it better.
Dude, people don't give this ending enough credit. I don't care if you think, oh, it ruined the immersion because it's not a jokey thing for a joke episode, or oh, where was this emotional investment in another matchup? Just shut up and appreciate it, man. The post-analysis made an attempt to make Aquaman look better. An attempt. Because they don't outright insult him, but more so just talk about how out of his league he was. Because let's not forget, sure, SpongeBob did all of this, but Aquaman was still put at 55 billion times the speed of light. I don't think anyone talks about that. But aside from that, it basically just talks about how amazingly crazy SpongeBob is. Speaking of, imagine if Goku vs. Superman 2 ended this way. I think that would have been really funny in retrospect.
But yeah, they might not outright insult Aquaman in the post-analysis, but they really don't show him any respect either. They just stop talking about him, which rubs me the wrong way. It's not a deal breaker for me or anything like that, but it's just awkward.
Since we're at the end of the episode, I guess now would be the time to address the elephant in the room. And I know it was touched on a bit earlier, but some people are just kind of outright insulted about how this episode portrayed Aquaman, as if he wasn't the main reason the character was seen as a joke for so long and did active damage to his reputation. Is this really the hill you guys want to die on?
Yes.
Yeah, SpongeBob's post-analysis, that's standard stuff, listing out his ranges and all that, yeah. Until we get to the string fit, which is by far the largest calculated speed fits of all of Death Battle. EXE Darkseid, eat your heart out.
I feel like it might be necessary to clarify, they didn't say SpongeBob is the fastest character in Death Battle, but if you're using normal numbers, oh, he is, baby.
Oh yeah, and also this really made a lot of people upset for how high they play SpongeBob, and I kind of find that even more funny.
I mean, if there was one word to describe this episode, that's what it would be. Funny. We've said this multiple times already, but this is one of the funniest episodes of the season. Probably the funniest.
But you want to know what would have made it funnier? If this had actually been the Halloween episode all along. No, really. No, really.
No, really.
Yo, can anyone explain to me how Speedy is sitting right next to me, but is also on trial up there?
You know, I wonder what I did to get into all that mess.
Isn't he on trial for breaking the space-time continuum or something?
Maybe that's what it is.
I hope he gets the death penalty, personally. Nothing against the guy, I just want him to die.
Judge, I'm telling you, I needed to break the time-space continuum in order to tell these guys about what number 1 was supposed to be. It's extremely vital to the...
I've heard enough. I hereby sentence you to League of Legends.
I don't know how to feel about the premiere of a season getting this high, which basically implies most of the episodes never topped the first episode of a season, but this was still a pretty good episode.
Tough talk coming from the person who ranked it the lowest.
I don't necessarily have any gripes with it, I just like the other episodes more, but I will say that this episode did make me get interested about Jinx, so I went out and checked out Arcane because I just heard a lot of good things about it, and it became my favorite show of all time. So I definitely came into the brain sense of thinking this was going to be more for Arcane Jinx rather than League of Legends Jinx, because I hear nothing but terrible things about that game.
Funny story, we forced him to play League of Legends.
Most miserable gaming experience of my life.
Hey, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I mean, the best part was the 30-minute tutorial.
You guys are fucking monsters.
And see, there's the difference between my opinion and your opinion. Me, I got interested in Jinx way back when she first had her trailer drop. So I was always more well in tune with her League of Legends interpretations. Like, completely unhinged. Arcane is toned back, mostly because it's an origin story sort of deal. Honestly, I'm glad that they leaned further into the League of Legends aspect. By the way, for any of you who've watched my top 10s, you might know that I originally advocated for Jinx vs. Junkrat. That stopped as soon as Arcane came out, just in case you were wondering.
And then here I am. I don't like either. I really don't have any interest in League of League, but my main gripe is with Harley Quinn. She is the most obnoxious, annoying son of a bitch that I have ever seen across DC's lineup. They're trying to turn her into DC's Deadpool, but without any of the charm that made Deadpool fun in the first place. So, needless to say, I wasn't too thrilled about this announcement.
You have it at number 3.
He knows too much. But yeah, no, I like this episode somehow. Do you guys want to find out how, or?
So, Harley and Jinx. Can't really say I was expecting it. At the same time, yeah, that makes sense. Arcane is big, and Harley's show is going pretty strong. So, yeah, never had really any special relations to both characters, besides playing League with Hyper. Yeah, I guess I really don't have much to say, huh?
You have it at number 1!
You know, you sound genuinely invested for the guy that has it the lowest out of any of us.
Am I the only one who makes sense here? Actually, no, that's just normal.
We're all mad here. I guess that's part of the theme. The analysis opens up and we get to Harley's backstory, which admittedly I find pretty interesting. From her very inception, she was going to be revolved around the Joker. So it's really neat to see just how cunning the Joker can be, taking what's supposed to be a psychiatrist for villains and emotionally manipulating them into being their sidekicks. It's really tragic what Harley used to represent back then. And it is admittedly really nice to see that she's been able to evolve into her own character after afterwards, even if she's a bitch.
I think what makes this analysis so good for me, it's just how it doesn't really do anything that stands out particularly, but everything just feels right. Character introduction, overall story aspects, and how they go about it just feels so natural. That might be a vague thing to say, but for all intents and purposes, I think that's just how Death Battle should be when it comes to going over a character. Everything is just kept simple, and you learn things you don't know much about a character. Like with Magneto, I didn't even know how much she has turned over to the good side, being extremely close to the Bat family, instead of being just like DC's attempt at doing a Deadpool. So I will definitely see that this analysis kept me engaged, especially on my second rewatch of this episode. I just really liked Harley Quinn as a character because of this. That might say more about her than the actual stuff they go over, but no, even that is pretty good too.
And here's a good time to mention, like Speedy said before, the structure of this analysis, and Jinx's as well, feels natural. And as much as us as the Versus community talk about stats and calcs, I actually probably appreciate the simple outlook on it more.
That's definitely something I can wholeheartedly agree with.
Man, what a wholesome interaction getting to that.
And yeah, they also go over Harley's arsenal pretty well, with all gadgets and doodads, both things like her gun, which can shoot confetti ropes or explosive rounds, which most people know, and the rocket-powered pogo stick. I don't know, it exists. What am I supposed to do about it?
Love me some rocket-powered pogo sticks, man. You got no idea.
Speaking of which, Ringmaster just kind of shows up out of nowhere, which ties into a theory I'll mention later. Doesn't matter that much, though.
They even bring up the Joker Venom, which works on Superman, but not Jinx, but I'm getting ahead of myself there.
And let it be known, Harley did in fact lift the entire tree off the ground.
So let's go over to Mrs. Jinx's analysis.
Death.
Can I just say how much Arcane footage was used here? Like, I can't even imagine if this episode was done like 2 or 3 years ago, before Arcane was out. Like, man, Arcane just had a really big impact, huh?
Jinx's analysis, I find for the most part to be okay. I definitely do prefer Harley's, because while Jinx does definitely go over Arcane, which is the stuff I like, I'm not really a fan of the placement for it, as they kind of just save her origins later and then just bring it up in the middle. And it doesn't really flow as well as I would like it. And this is just a personal thing, but I wasn't really interested in much of League of Legends Jinx as I was for Arcane. Like, they did fit in as much as they could, and while I do like it, I just find it to be overall kind of just there for me. Not bad, but just fine.
I understand why bringing it up there might feel awkward, but at the same time, it feels fitting considering that is how people were introduced to Jinx as a character initially. When we first met her, she was just this unhinged psychopath who was the rival to Vi, the Enforcer. We didn't know anything more about the relationship. It was only later on that we found out that they were sisters, that they grew up together, and Arcane was the point in time where we learned about their past, and that was super recent. I think the analysis is trying to give that feeling of how League of Legends players know Jinx.
Knowing Jinx, they don't know any girls at all, because they play League of Legends. Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? Am I right? No? Okay.
And also, speaking of people who don't know girls, Marshall's back, and I'm pretty sure Jinx's analysis was originally going to go first, because this feels like introducing Marshall to the episode, as opposed to the last segment where he was just there. It feels like Jinx's analysis was supposed to come first, and then Harley's.
And just like with the Harley analysis, most of the story aspects here are greatly covered. Like how Vi and Jinx finally made up with each other, and how Jinx met Siggs who could show her how to use her sanity in a more controlled way. It's a great way to end off her analysis and give a very clear vision on what kind of character she is at the end of the day, without dwelling into the whole crazy girl aspect, giving some clarification. So let's see Jinx control madness on Harley Quinn.
Oh yeah, she is completely in control. Look at how she is sniping those crows with a missile launcher.
And can we just talk about the great environment setting? A carnival theme just fits both of the characters so perfectly. Okay, I mean, yeah, it makes sense for Harley.
Alright, shut up. This is my time to talk. I really, really love the carnival aesthetic. For just anything in Versus, it is incredibly underutilized. And I just think it looks really, really cool. And I love how it's used in this fight. The roller coaster, the merry-go-round, the funhouse, the mirror house. We'll get there when we get there, but they used this setting so well, and oh my gosh, I need to gush about that. And I really hope they use it more in other matchups. Even if they don't really need it, they need it. Trust me.
And all this is just added thanks to the incredible visuals for the fight. Everything looks gorgeous and highly detailed. This is probably one of their best looking episodes to date. I would say in terms of pure visuals, this is at the top for me, and just does the episode wonders.
The personalities of the two are pretty fun. How the fight definitely starts with them being annoyed with each other, but also just having a good time.
I'm honestly surprised by how much I was able to not only tolerate, but like the two of them in this animation. It's definitely way better for Harley than her source material tends to be. As for Jinx, I got no real way to gauge, but I'm going to assume it's accurate to the source material for hyper's sake.
Watch Arcane.
No. Anyway, the fight's good.
It's neat seeing both of their brands of insanity bounce off of each other, and also the different gadgets and weapons get their individual time to shine. One of the standout sequences for me was after Harley ties Jinx up with dynamite in her mouth. You get this nice gag where they're running super high energy, and then it zooms out and they're just on a merry-go-round and they're barely moving. But then Jinx uses Phantom Dancer to get out of the bindings and blow up Harley with her own dynamite.
I think what also makes this fight so great is the two voice actresses. You have Felicia Valenti as Harley Quinn and Alyssa Lovelock as Jinx. They really kill it as the roles. You can really feel the engagement in their characters, especially during the segment where Harley and Jinx are on a roller coaster transporting in between different dimensions. Hey look, there's a Blake vs. Mikasa reference there. It's a nice little segment of them basically fighting over the Nintendo Switch and just going at it. So yeah, it was a fun segment overall.
But the roller coaster transitions, maybe a little bit awkwardly, into the best segment of the fight.
The House of Mirrors scene is absolutely perfect. Harley inflicting Jinx with a Joker venom and making her go insane is really well done. It's reminiscent to how Jinx goes crazy in Arcane, even having the hand-drawn overlays reminiscent of Arcane's, which looks really cool and dynamic.
You also get a quote from the games here. Just a neat little reference.
Harley's response on how she is a doctor and saying that Jinx doesn't have the same smile as a certain other smiling patient goes so hard. I didn't catch this on a first viewing, but picking up on it, I really like the back and forth here.
And you know what goes even harder than Harley's response? Jinx catching the baseball bat in her bare hands, having her activate the Quicksilver sash, removing all of the Joker venom from her system, and then just letting loose on Harley.
And Harley spews out Feather, which is actually another reference specifically for Harley to the movie Birds of Prey. Just a lot of these extra details that add so many layers to the fight and make it really something special.
I feel like Jinx kicking Harley into the hammer game looks a little bit off-center, but I am the master of nitpicking.
I just find it funny because it radiates the same energy as Batman just absolutely launching Captain America. Anyway, this ending sequence is probably my favorite part of the entire episode. Not just for the build-up, but also just for Jinx's I literally cannot give a fuck if you paid me to energy.
What's so cool about this part is that we get a little reference to Joker vs. Sweet Tooth and how Sweet Tooth was manipulated by Joker in order to get closer to him, ultimately leading to his death. But Jinx? Nah, she's not gonna have any of that.
And putting an end to DC's non-Marvel streak, which has been going on for 10 years and counting. Just the ending shot of her head winning the Test Your Might thing and the Get Jinx firework, it all just comes together. It's really symbolic and absolutely no one talks about how the streak ended. Maybe it wasn't as big a deal as everyone made it out to be.
See, Gumball, I'm seeing here in the paperwork, you got it wrong. This was a Batman loss, not a DC loss.
Well, I'm looking in the paperwork and I see some Anthrax catch.
So post-analysis. The post-analysis is your run-of-the-mill standard reasonings for both characters. But here we get something new introduced. The advantages and disadvantages. And it's kind of bare bone compared to what later episodes do. I mean, yeah, look at Harley's side. Only like 2 notes. Not that impressive, is it? But luckily, they do get better. So yeah, so that was something that caught most people off guard at first.
One thing I do find neat is them explaining how Jinx's resistance to toxins via her home being basically basically a toxic wasteland, gave her enough resistance to the toxins to be able to use one of her counters, like the Quicksilver Sash. There was a point in time where I got confused and thought they meant that she outright countered the toxins, but that's not what they're saying.
Like most episodes where the explosion is brought up in, yeah, it's not really that impressive, and just pales in comparison to the opponent's other feats. Kind of just shows that
big explosion don't mean big number.
By the way, Mad Laugh Riot is a genuine banger. Probably a top 10 for all of Modern Death Battle for me.
This episode just had a great aesthetic going for it, characters that I genuinely really like, and I think the way it was handled was pretty smooth overall. Analyses were structured well, the fight was choreographed well, even if it did have a couple moments of jank. Overall, yeah, just I liked it a lot.
I definitely agree with that. Usually the Star episodes aren't really the best, or at least pales in comparison to the other episodes of the season, but here, yeah, it's quite the opposite, like we mentioned earlier. Everything in this episode, it just feels right. From the voice acting to the just spectacular animation. This matchup was always just kind of with everything, but with seeing how much style and effort was put into it, it just hits all the right notes.
And while I did have it the lowest ranking out of everyone, don't take that as me not enjoying it. I still really did just as much as the rest, and seeing all this passion and effort for both of these two take into full effect really did put a smile on my face the whole way through.
So, in the end, we learned crazy people make for good content. I don't think that was the lesson I should have been taking from this.
So I'd say that was a pretty fun ranking. We had very divisive opinions between ourselves, but now we're down to our final slot.
It may not be everyone's favorite on this ranking, but I think everyone's satisfied for where we put it.
I think it's time to conclude our second ranking video.
And our number one is...
Hey, I'm here to talk to you about what your number one best ranked episode is.
You're under arrest for unsanctioned time travel.
Wait, hold on. Hey, don't touch me!
Man, even in the future, Speedy is slow as fuck.
This is it, Time Hog! The end of your future!
I told you, it's no use! Perhaps it's time we part away. We can't afford for it to end like this is it. This is, oh, now you feel it! I sing to your blood! This isn't the time to care! The target is right there!
So, this matchup that no one wanted. I mean, like there are a few people, but for the most part, pretty much everyone was not on board with this matchup. And then when Death Battle decided to tag in the Xeno and Archie side, I think that only added gasoline to the fire. So needless to say, hype was not on this episode's side.
Yes, I certainly wasn't on the side of this episode being announced, especially with the Archie and Xenoverse, because the one thing that I did actually like from a matchup I didn't really have any strong feelings about was the focus on the Trunks that I actually cared about rather than some lesser spin-off.
I definitely did see a good number of people get hyped for the matchup. Personally, I was always someone who wanted just normal Trunks versus Silver. It took a while for me to actually become comfortable with this one happening. I know a lot of people said that this is a lot more of an interesting debate. We'll get to that, but...
Even after watching the episode and having months time over, I was never really warmed up much to the idea. Well, until I started playing Xenoverse 2, and well, this speaks for itself.
In a lot of ways, this episode feels a lot like Wally vs. Archie. Take a relatively popular matchup, but using different versions to make it more fair for both parties.
Yeah, more fair.
Trunks vs. Silver feels a lot like Wally vs. Archie in certain areas, which I will probably elaborate on a bit later.
Yeah, no, it definitely is a bit reminiscent of a couple episodes, actually. You'll see what we mean when we get into all the factors of the episode, starting with Trunks' analysis.
So before I got heavily invested into Xenoverse, I wasn't really a fan of this. In fact, it was my least favorite analysis this entire season. But after I did highly invest myself into the world of Xenoverse, I can safely say this is still my least favorite analysis this season. To be fair, this is more of a focus on Xenoverse Trunks rather than normal Trunks. And to its credit, yeah, it does explain the world of Xenoverse and how it operates and how Trunks functions within the world, but I would have appreciated if they gave some more context to classic Trunks himself so that the audience isn't entirely lost, because again, to any newcomer who just opens up with this is going to be their first impression of them, and I don't really think it does exactly a great job on it. It mainly just focuses on the Xenoverse side of stuff, which I am kind of mixed on, but I do understand why they went with this direction.
And it is true that they don't talk about any particular arcs or storylines, but ultimately they get all the information out that's required for the death battle, so your mileage may vary.
By the way, they never name drop Gohan at all throughout this entire analysis, who is like the most important character to him, minus his dad.
Probably because they're saving for the next season's episode, Mark versus Gohan.
Shut up.
It's mostly just scaling and number stuff, which is really uninteresting to me, and just going over the basics of the world. And if you're already a fan of Xenoverse and Heroes, it doesn't really go into much other plots other than the basics of which you already know, and is more just a checklist than anything else.
They bring up a good amount of stuff, the crystals, key sword? Stop it.
On the other spectrum, I do think Silver's analysis fares a bit better. I'm not as invested in Silver because I don't really have that many high opinions on him, but I thought it was alright.
This is a man who hasn't read Archie, you can tell.
And here's why I think using different versions of these characters really benefits. This gives both combatants so much more to work with when it comes to their arsenal. You have Trunks' key sword, and you have Silver's Chronos control. It makes the analysis feel more complete and more stuffed.
I was always someone who was perfectly fine with just the standard telekinesis versus key attacks. But again, I came around on this one. It definitely adds a little bit more depth. It actually integrates the time mechanics into the fight in a more cohesive way than they could have if it were their normal selves.
Silver's analysis goes deeper into the Archie lore that Archie Sonic was talking about. Here we get a grander scope for the cosmology, and Spawn.
Yeah, no, they were really obsessed with Spawn for this.
This is foreshadowing of some kind. But as a trade-off to all that neat stuff, we gotta have all of those Sonic bad jokes, like everyone's favorite 06, or, oh, the last thing that Sonic needs is more characters. Which, by the way, go read the IDW comics. They have some amazing original characters. Tangle, Whisper, Surge especially, oh my god. Alright, getting sidetracked. However, those jokes don't really hamper my enjoyment of the rundown as a whole, although it would be improved significantly if they weren't there. I do hope in the future when we get more of these Archie characters, I hope they focus more on the character than the world building. As crazy as some things can get, we are here for the characters at the end of the day. Feel free to avoid Knuckles as much as possible though.
And now is as good a time as any to just really appreciate the editors on the analysis portions of Death Battle this season. They definitely put in a lot of hard work, and it's a shame that Nick and Gerardo aren't slated to be doing the editing work anymore. But I appreciate everything they did bring to the table during their tenure.
Anyway, fight time. Portal ring, go! That may or may not have just been a normal ring from a K jewelry store.
It opens up with the scenario of Trunks trying to arrest Silver for time travel, which fits the two, although it starts out a little slow and abruptly.
Honestly, it didn't leave the greatest impression when we saw the preview for the fight, but it picked up surprisingly well.
And now a sprite break, because these Trunks sprites are good. They're made by Origin the GOAT! The GOAT! And they look fantastic. Yeah, they're kind of stiff in some places, but the detail on them are pretty good.
Once the portal ring gets tossed into the fight, it picks up in quality fast. What started as a normal 6, 7 out of 10 immediately turns into like a 9 or even a 10 out of 10 as the fight keeps going on. All the sequences just being thrown out, especially the way that Silver just reflects stuff, looks amazing. Above all else, I think the effects pop off really hard.
There is an impressive amount of attention to detail throughout this entire animation. I would argue more so than most episodes, outside of Sora vs. Lich King.
And you might be wondering why I have it so high when I've done nothing but rag on it for the most part. This is why. After the intro, it picks up hard, and me being invested into Xenoverse made me like it a lot more and pick up on a ton of details that I'm 90% sure wasn't intentional, but it fits perfectly in the context of Xenoverse that I'm gonna pretend it is and like it all that more.
Some of them very well might have been intentional.
Meanwhile, on Silver's end, of course, you throw in the
It's no use!
which people had a problem with for some reason. I never understood that one.
Basically arguing that it was out of character for Archie Silver in particular, when no, that's more so he just doesn't like when people give up. Doesn't necessarily mean he would be above taunting someone with it.
Anyway, you got the line, you got the really, really cool giant rock formation, which is just a callback to his fight in Sonic Generations, which I greatly appreciate. But not as much as I appreciate just how the telekinesis in itself is used.
Just like in Wally vs. Archie, like Speedy was mentioning, we go super real fast here. It's kind of necessary, I would say, for the fight, but it might strike people as a little bit soon for it.
Trunks then spews a little line that's a reference to Vegeta vs. Shadow.
Rip off.
Fitting considering that's the first Dragon Ball vs. Sonic matchup.
And also the only other Sonic vs. Dragon Ball matchup, but still, it's cute. This episode really liked bringing out the quotes.
Trunks then launches that little rat all the way up to space, and Silver then decides to crush pieces of the moon and just launches them at Trunks.
Oh, don't forget the Team 4-Star reference.
Ah, crap baskets.
Speaking of TMS, Tyson Echo replaces his role as Trunks.
Obviously, he's fitting in the role. I don't think I need to say that. Silver seems equally fitting. He's voiced by this guy named Esu Onsti. I don't know. He kind of sounds familiar. Like, has he voiced in video games?
Red, I think it's all in your head, honestly. Trunks then decides that he can't get enough of his Genshin Impact Gambling Edition and decides to look at his cards and see what he can get. And, well, he gets Pan and Kid Goku. And Oolog is just floating there. Hi, Oolog.
Look, Goku in the season again, for the third time, just like Vegeta.
And just like Vegeta, he died.
But no, real talk, Oolong wasn't even in the storyboard. It's one of my favorite details they added.
And then we get one of the coolest moments in the entire show for me. The GT squad throwing a combined beam attack at Silver, and Silver just nopes that and slings it right back at them, flinging Goku and Pan all the way back down to Earth, and Trunks just blocking it with his sword is one of the sickest things ever. Not as sick as when Silver hurls the beams off from hitting the Earth all the way back up into space, combining it into the beam he reflected earlier, all to hit it right back at Trunks. It looks dynamic, insane, and just really cool to look at. This all culminates into a really amazing shot of the sword shattering, but Trunks still pushing forward and transforming into the god form. Then he just lays the smackdown on Silver, crushing him through the entire moon, which then leads into what I am very certain is an intentional Xenoverse combo into a huge kick, and then a final flash beam. Fitting since Vegeta also did that. And yeah, no, this entire scene just gives me life, and it's my favorite moment in the entire episode.
But that doesn't give me nearly as much life as Hedge of Tomorrow does, which is the best track of this season, hands down. The way that Logan and Yates just combine their voices, the combination of the voices between Soft and Scream is just like a perfect combination, like peanut butter and jelly. And Lean on the side. It's just so cool. I'm not sure if words can describe how amazing this track is to me. So I'm just going to talk about the other cool stuff. We've touched on the effects, but I think it's at its peak once the key sword is thrown out. As soon as the key sword comes out and Silver gets hit by it, everything just distorts so rapidly. And here, I thought this was it. This was curtains. I saw some people betting on Silver, but the main consensus from my point of view was Trunks. And that's what I was going for the most part. But as soon as I saw Silver fight back against it, I had a silver of hope, if you will, that he could come out on top somehow.
I don't know what places you were looking. I saw a lot more people say that Silver was going to win, even from my reaction. So as you guys could tell, no, I did kind of see the Silver win coming.
But I didn't, and I hold my opinion in higher value, but I respect yours as well, because we are friends. Anyway, this sequence gets us into what's probably the coolest moment in the entire fight. You know, aside from all the other coolest moments in the entire fight, the Eternal Time Labyrinth, which is just full of who the fuck are these people?
There are so many Easter eggs in this one scene that it's kind of hard to even list them. Generally speaking, you have a bunch of time traveling characters though, from Death Battle, from pop culture, basically anywhere. I know Fleetway Sonic's hidden in there somewhere.
And there's also that one cat from the face of the poorly aged Thane's Twitter gimmick account. Just thought that was interesting.
The visuals in The Crack of Time look really nice. The blue chains sprouting all around Silver. Trunks getting in that last one-liner, but it's a little bit short-lived for him.
So an ironic twist of fate, Silver uses the line that's been often used to mock him in a really cool way.
I told you, it's no. Yes!
The music blares as the best part of the OST, in my opinion, as Silver gets his final turnaround and reverts the sword back to its original position.
Which just so happens to be careening towards Trunks.
Trunks notices this and tries to catch it with his bare hands, but the key sword and Silver's telekinesis is just too strong for him, thus impaling the half Saiyan, ending his versus animation win streak. To bring up another similarity with Wally vs Archie, both Trunks and Archie's death are very similar. How they both glitch throughout time, ending pretty much their entire timeline and life as we know it right in front of us. Again, I like the similarities here.
Speaking of similarities, I mentioned another one that you could compare it to. I don't know if this is just me, probably not. It kind of feels like Reverse Flash vs. Goku Black in its execution.
This post-analysis is heavily layered in cosmology talk, which kind of leaves the viewer more confused than informed.
There's also this gem.
Even in his super form, it's questionable whether or not Super Silver had the physical ability to match Super Saiyan Trunks.
Now, this analysis really goes all out on the character stats. Like, this is the least dumbed down post-analysis in FBL history. Yeah, they just go full out. And I can see why they usually don't do this. Because, like I said earlier, most of this stuff just kind of goes over my head.
When they go over the cosmology stuff again, I think it's just kind of funny. They go out of their way to highlight Spawn again. This episode definitely isn't a 10 out of 10. There are flaws to acknowledge, but the positives heavily outweigh them by like a huge amount, 90 to 10% if I had to give numbers.
So it's a 9 out of 10.
Shut up. But yes, this is probably the best sprite animation that Death Battle's ever done. And if they had some good analyses to go with it, I wouldn't have had any problems calling it a 10 out of 10 episode. And after all these years, with Sonic in the middle of a losing streak, we're finally at a point where there's a Sonic episode that just is amazing in almost every aspect. I have been waiting so long for this.
Wally vs. Archie.
Yeah, gotta say, the odds were stacked against the episode for me. I wasn't really looking forward to it, and I had a lot of pretense negativity towards the matchup and episode in general, but after seeing the end product, just the amount of passion and effort went into it, and also wasting my life on Xenoverse, I definitely grew to love it a lot more over time. And while it's not my favorite of the season, I can definitely see why it's high up for a lot of people.
For me, I very much appreciate Silver getting a good amount of respect. I feel like he's an underappreciated Sonic character. I know a lot of people were soured by his first appearance, but he's always kind of struck a chord with me, I'll be honest. So seeing his powers done justice and even his character done justice is cool.
Well, I have not really said much about my opinions on the matchup itself. I can definitely say this is a really worthwhile episode. Between Harley and Jinx in this episode, they kept switching around about what my number one is. And while ultimately Harley and Jinx won out, this was still a very close second. I'm really happy that Death Battle did it. And it's nice to see Silver not being the constant butt of the versus animation jokes.
All said, pretty good episode. Although, you know, I do just kind of wonder what happened to Speedy from the future.
So that was season 9. It definitely wasn't the same highs as season 8, but it's more consistently good. Even in matchups that none of us really hyped for, they went ahead and proved us wrong that it could still work, and it really works. A majority of this season has just been banger after banger. While there's one episode I really don't like, the rest I'm either indifferent to or just a flat out fan of. So I gotta say, this is probably the best track record out of any season. And I'm hoping that's a sign of things to come.
Yeah, no, this is probably gonna be my favorite season that they've released. At least, so long as the recency bias hasn't really gotten to me. But either way, I'm happy with everything that we got. Even the episodes that I'm not quite as fond of, I don't absolutely hate.
So, my final thoughts? This season has definitely been the season that I've enjoyed the most way through. I will say I like the first half a bit better than the second half. Everything overall was still a pretty enjoyable ride. While I agree with Gumball and saying that I still prefer the last season over this one, what this season has to offer is still no slouch compared to the rest. We got some franchises that we never expected to see on Death Battle, episodes that blew everyone's expectations, and some episodes that didn't quite live up to the hype. But overall, everything was still
wrapped together
in a nice little package that I will enjoy until the next season comes.
I can't wait for the next season, personally. There are going to be some neat matchups, that's for sure, and I am looking forward to them.
This season, it was one I felt very conflicted on, because it wasn't really necessarily doing anything bad for the most part, but it never got me as excited as the previous season did. I guess part of that is just me being very apathetic towards most of the matchups this season. I either just had no stake or just didn't know much about either character, and that always lets me either going in very neutral or very much not looking forward to the episode. Thankfully, most of the time, I did come out enjoying myself for this season, and yeah, much like what the rest said and what everyone else has said, it's very consistent. But it never really reaches the peaks previous seasons do. This is the first time in a season where none of the episodes really actually got into my top 10, which, again, is not saying anything poor to the season, it just never got those same highs for me personally. And the one matchup I was looking forward to didn't really meet the expectations I was hoping for. It kind of just mitigated my feelings towards the rest of the season's output, all the way until the finale, in which I was just hoping there might be some cool matchups that they could reveal. I'm not going to say it ruined the whole season for me, because it didn't. I think it was one I enjoyed overall in retrospect, but it did kind of left me feeling dampened for the rest of the season. And all the stake I had at that point was just me seeing what matchups they were going to reveal for the next season, and maybe I could hopefully have...
Hyper.
What?
Look.
Survival of the fittest in the game alive. Take with me, we ready to fight.
Go it's Cole versus Alex, guys. It's Cole versus Alex.